Good evening, everybody. You are watching the Abstract live stream, and my name is Manfred. I'm the CEO of Abstract, and we have a great, totally unscripted show for you today. And as always, I'm not alone, and I think with me is once again Jeremy. Maybe we can switch to Jeremy so Jeremy can say hello to everybody. Fantastic, Jeremy. How are you doing?
Not too bad, actually. The temperature's getting a bit colder in New York City. Leaves are starting to fall, seasons are changing. But as things often do in New York City, things just keep moving on. You keep pressing on.
Yeah, same here. It's actually a beautiful Wednesday here in Germany, the 1st October. We have a lot of things to talk about. I think it's going to be a very interesting show for you guys. One of the things that we're introducing today is the plugin SDK. So we got a lot of requests from the community to allow them to be able to build integrations into other tools that we don't build, like Maya or Max. So I think that's going to be really interesting to see how the community is going to build tools and what kind of tools they're building. I think the SDK for Instamat is going to be going live today. At least that was our initial plan. But one of the issues that we're seeing is that a lot of our team is sick currently. Even this production, we're just winging this one. It's not the usual team, but we're trying to do our best. But we expect the announcement on our website to go live and the binaries to be available. And then everybody can just go ahead and build integrations. That's pretty exciting, right, Jeremy?
Absolutely. So I guess what makes this SDK, this plugin SDK, a little bit different than something like Instamat pipeline, where you're running something in the command line?
Yeah, I mean, this SDK is designed for integrations to allow people to integrate into tools. And there's going to be some rules and regulations into the things you can do and the things you should not do. For instance, you should not try to build something like Instamat pipeline or build a command line application. That would be absolutely against the terms. And I think we're going to enforce those because we do have to make some money after all. But it will allow the community to integrate into tools like Houdini or into some NVIDIA remix pipeline tools to directly bring the content from Instamat into whatever application you're using. I also look forward to seeing an Instamat integration into tools like Godot, for instance. I think that could be really interesting, or even seeing Instamat integrated into competing tools. That would also be funny to see.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the things I'm really noticing is that the community for Instamat is really starting to grow. And so by being able to give these tools to people who are really invested into, integrating Instamat into their workflows with other tools, other engines, other DCC applications, I'm really excited to see how they use the SDK for that.
Absolutely. I think it's going to be super interesting. But let's just, we don't have a new release plan today, besides the plugin SDK, guys. We're still working on it. And what we're trying to do with this show is just to give you guys a direct access to me as the CEO, but also to the team and the news. We will be doing more regular updates for Instamat and Instalot and all of our tools, but this show today, it's going to be more of a hangout. We do know that we have to produce more educational material to show you how our tools work, and there's a lot of ideas we have for this Abstract live stream today, and also for the future. And I think we're going to start by just trying to do some texturing and see how we can build a project in asset texturing, where we just show you guys, okay, that's how it works. That's how you texture an asset, or at least that's how I would texture an asset. There's many different ways. There's different ways to do things, as always, but this is how I would do it. So maybe let's directly jump over to the screen share, Mr. Producer. Thank you so much. All right, so you should be able to see this beautiful splash of the Instamat September 2025 release, which I hope you guys have installed. And what I want to do here is I'm going to go to an asset texturing project. And I'm not going to use a custom mesh. I'm just going to start off with the create tutorial that I'm sure you guys are familiar with. But we're not going to use just the stock tutorial. We're going to delete all of the layers and start from scratch. And I want to show you guys how to bake and what you have to look for, because I think we're getting a lot of questions around baking, right, Jeremy?
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen on our community channels and Discord, the baking workflow is a lot of times what people focus on at the beginning, because oftentimes it is the first step, right? It's how we take our, high poly models that we've, done subdivision surface modeling, or we have some sculpts from something like ZBrush or Blender, and we want to be able to bake and transfer those details onto a low poly that we've generated. So yeah, I think it's a great place to start today.
Yeah, and I think baking it's something that's difficult to get into, but once you know how it works and you know the ins and outs, it's not as difficult. It's a mysterious topic because it's not as approachable as modeling something in Blender. But once you get it, it's very easy, and you don't have to stress yourself that you have to bake something. Especially in Instamat, we try to make everything as automatic as possible. So here's the crate, and I removed all of the baked data. And as you guys know, in the lower left corner, you typically have all of your baked data here. So as you can see, I removed all of the bake information, and what we have in the viewport is just the naked crate. And what you can see is that the lighting on the crate doesn't look so great. And that's something that when we used to build games, we try to make our meshes as efficient as possible, and this typically includes not having a lot of normal splits, because if you do a normal split, you have to split the UVs so the lighting looks correct. So one of the ways that we did it is to try and have a smooth surface where possible. So this is why a lot of our assets look pretty funny if you would look at them naked like this crate. So normally you would expect the shading not to distort around these areas, but as you can see, it looks pretty funny. But once we bake the mesh, you'll see that it looks pretty good. So to bake the mesh, if you would start clean and you load your mesh, Instamat would automatically show you the baking dialog. We don't have this here, but you can always bring up the baking window by just clicking Bake Mesh. So I'm doing this, and as you can see, here is our bake window. And you could bake without a high poly mesh. That's another question we get quite often, but you do want to have a high poly mesh to bake a much nicer curvature map, to bake a much nicer normal map. You really need to have that high poly mesh available. And even if you just start off with a low poly and your colleagues or you didn't model a high poly mesh, it's still worth to apply a subdivision modifier to have the surface smoother and have nicer curvature on the mesh, because that detail will be transferred to your normal map. But I do have a source mesh here, so I'm clicking on the button to pick a local file. Actually, here, that's the first question, like what is the difference between this pick package resource and pick local file, right? So package resource basically means if you have a file stored in your package, you can just pick it from here, or you can pick something even from the system library, but typically it doesn't make a lot of sense to bake down the cloth balls. So in this case, we're going to pick a local file. And I have my crate right here. So that's the high poly mesh. And I can show you guys how this would look like. So I'll open Instalot Studio. And I'll just bring in the same crate that I just brought into Instamat. All right, guys, so here you can see our high poly mesh, and it's essentially the same crate. But as you can see, it has much nicer details on the much nicer curvature. Oh, that shouldn't be done. Much nicer curvature, more details, much nicer bevels. I mean, these days you could just bake your low poly and then bake the bevels using a bevel sampler, but if you have a high poly, if you can create it, I would still go that route. Let me actually reduce the size of the dog. Right.
We got a question or actually a comment here just about baking. Someone mentions, it would be nice if we in the future add the ability to have like a visible cage for baking. Is that something we're looking into, or one of the things I find about Instamat is oftentimes, just to quote the phrase, it kind of just works most of the time, and a lot of the times it has to do with like the preparation of making sure the UVs are good to go, and I have some experience making knowing what works and what doesn't. But what are we looking at here in terms of how best to prepare a mesh for good baking, and what are we looking forward to in the future?
Yeah, I mean, we do want to add visualization for the baking, so you can see the baking cage, you can see how the race would be, produced, and all of those details. But that's something that other tools added really, really late in the game. We're talking about a 10-year development cycle when the feature got added. But it's something that we want to add really soon. Also to be able to paint normals and to have a bit more artistic control over the baking cage. But by default, Instamat's baking cage is really good. And you should be able to just load in your source mesh, hit bake, and you're good to go. Just make sure that the overlap between the low and the high poly is as close as it's possible, and you can achieve this typically if you follow the subdivision surface modeling workflow. So instead of creating a separate low poly and a separate high poly, you would just model using the subdiv workflow, and then you export it once using a lot of subdivisions as high poly mesh, and you would export it again without any subdivisions for the low poly mesh, and then later you could remove all the edges that you don't need. But we found at our studio that this was the best workflow for hard surface assets, to just use subdivision surface modeling.
Nice. And I also find that I use Instalot to generate a low poly for me, often using something like the remesher or the polygon optimizer. So if you're looking for a really quick way to take a high poly model that you've done with subdivision work already, or a high poly sculpt, you could easily just toss it into Instalot, or even do a remesh voxelization in Instamat to automatically generate a low poly as well as an option.
Absolutely. But that's not something we're going to look into today. That's something for another stream. It's a beautiful workflow to go from some random super dense mesh using Inslot to a low poly that has all the bake data and then directly loading that into Instamat. That's a beautiful workflow. I love it. But today I just want to focus on the baking and the texturing, about how we would do that. So going back to the screen share and our baking window here, we have two different bake engines you can use. It's CPU and GPU, and the CPU baker is super fast. A lot of people just use the CPU baker, but the GPU baker has some benefits, especially when it comes to baking a lot of samples for your AO or curvature map, but it also has limitations. So the CPU baker scales beautifully over gigantic meshes, and it's more robust when it comes to non-manifold and broken meshes versus the GPU baker. You're VRAM limited, and you're limited to how big the buffer can be that's processed by the baker. And what you also have to consider is that the CPU baker and the GPU baker are two very different bakers. They don't really share any code. And that makes it difficult for us to have feature parity and do it exactly in the same way. We're trying to, but there's always some things that you can do in the CPU baker that the GPU baker cannot do. But it's typically more advanced stuff, so I don't think you easily run into those.
But do you recommend that if like a bake isn't working out in one of them, to try and swap over to the other just to test it out? I mean, most likely it probably will work pretty well, but maybe it's a good idea to try if something's, we might be running out of VRAM, for example, with the GPU, and just switching over to the CPU would be better.
Yeah, if you have 2 or 3 gig VRAM GPU, then, or even a shared memory card, it might be better to start with the CPU baker. But if you run into issues, what I would recommend first is to reach out to us and let us know about these issues, because we want to fix them as soon as possible to make sure it's ultra hardened. So I would use the GPU baker here to start with. And then the next big question that always comes up is, what is the best baking resolution? And the best baking resolution is not just 4K or 8K. The best baking resolution is the resolution that you intend to export your mesh in. Because if you bake at 4K and you downsample it to 2K, there might be some artifacts that happen from that downsample, because you don't have that perfect pixel to pixel mapping. So keep that in mind. It's good to bake at 4K or 2K and then export at whatever resolution. It's a very small difference, but you shouldn't have the difference between the bake resolution and then the export resolution shouldn't be too big. But the beauty is you can always just rebake and things are going to work out just fine. So I'll just use a 2K bake resolution here, and super sampling, just always keep it at 2x minimum. If you don't use super resolution, there might be some artifacts that you see more easily. That's normal. That happens to every baker. That's why the industry introduced super sampling. So just keep it at 2x. It's typically perfect. So I keep it at 2x here, and then when I'm iterating over my bake, I don't want to create all of the baking targets. So on the right side, I can disable all of the targets that I don't need to make sure that my bake looks good. So I'll just bake the normal tangent space here. It gets a bit more advanced what you should change here with the tangent space settings, like binormal per fragment or normalized per fragment. If you texture in Instamat, just keep it on OpenGL if you intend to do that, because you can always export as DirectX when you use the export window. But when you texture, the input normal map should remain OpenGL. That's what Instamat likes the most. And the binormal and normalized settings really depend on your renderer. So if you want to get ultra accurate rendering, you would want to enable and disable those features depending on your rendering engine. But keeping them off, the issues you'll get from it are fairly minor. But if you go for that ultimative accuracy, you'll need to figure out how your shader renders that normal map in the end, and then set it up exactly as the shader in your rendering engine would use the normal map. So let's just keep it like this. And down here, you can control how the bake actually works, and by default, if you have good overlap in your meshes, that means all of the meshes are overlapping. You have like a handle on the high poly here, and you have a handle on the same location on the low poly. Those ray lengths are really good. But if you have a more obscure workflow where you position things far apart, you would have to increase the ray length. Or if the differential between the high and the low poly mesh for some curvature is very big because you want to bake some inner part, you would have to increase, for instance, the inwards ray length here.
A lot of times I find that if I am getting anything baking on top of each other, or some shadowy artifacts or anything appearing, unexpectedly around separate pieces or surfaces, lowering or raising the ray length is the first thing I jump to first of all.
That's actually that's a good approach. I do agree to this. This is a good thing to iterate on. And then we have ignore back faces. That basically means if a ray would hit a polygon and it's facing this direction, the ray comes from here, that we would then ignore that face and the ray would go through it because it would want to find a face that would match what we're baking to. So by default, you should just keep that on. There might be some cases where you don't want this, but for the most part, you should keep it on. And average normals is basically what bakers need when they don't respect the geometry, the vertex normals set on the geometry. Instamat does that, so you can do some skewing on the vertex normals, and Instamat would use those. But if you have a flat shaded mesh where all of the normals are just flat shaded, that's that low poly look, you would want to enable average normals. Otherwise, you won't get like a nice curvature over the mesh.
So that's similar to how we were seeing our low poly crate from earlier, right? Those normals are more average, therefore
exactly,
giving you the rounded
Fantastic.
look. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's average normals that you can see right here, and that's the look you would expect.
Great.
Yeah, and then targeting mode is one of the more important settings. So let's see what happens if I keep it on all source meshes. The other option would be to bake by mesh name. But if I just bake this like this, I'll hit go. Yep, let's go. So it's doing the bake, it's already done. And let's see what we have here in the viewport. So this looks good on a first glance. Let me close this. But I do see some artifacts. For instance, the handle got baked on the body. I don't know if you can see this, but there's the handle right here. And then we have some part of the high poly handle baked on the body. And that's something that you don't want. Like this kind of artifact is terrible because you get that fake lighting that shouldn't happen that got baked down from the high poly mesh. And to avoid this, what you would want to do is you go to your bake window again and you just enable by mesh name and then rebake. So let's do this.
Right. So before it was taking the entire mesh into account, kind of baking it all at once. But now that we're using by mesh name, it's looking at the mesh suffixes, right? The underscore low, underscore high, for example, to make sure that certain meshes are only baking onto each other and not onto other surfaces.
Exactly. And that's what I did, and it's clean now. But if we look at the crate again in Installot Studio, I can show you exactly how this looks like. So this is our high poly mesh, and as you guys can see, if we select the handle here, it has that suffix underscore high. So basically what happens if you bake by mesh name, that on the low poly, we expect to have a mesh in the scene that would have the name underscore low. And this would find the corresponding mesh with the name underscore high and then bake it down. There's also something that most people are not aware is that you can actually bake multiple things down. If Instamat finds a mesh that matches the low poly name and has additional, suffixes on the high poly side, all of those would be baked down. So you can use that to bake 4 high poly meshes down to a single low poly mesh. It's a bit difficult to wrap your head around, but it's pretty good when it comes to the authoring workflow.
So if I had multiple objects that have the same name, with the suffix underscore high or underscore low, then it would bake it down onto that one surface that matches that name?
Exactly.
Awesome.
All right, so this is looking pretty good. So I can now go on and just bake all of my bake data here. So what do we need? We need ambient occlusion. We do want to have the curvature sampler here, the world space normals, a mesh ID map, position map, a thickness map. I think those are all that we need. Yeah, and then you might ask, why do we even need a position map? A position map is great, and it's really important if you want to do things like gradients over your mesh, or if you use the mesh volume mask. This is where we would use the position map. And the position map is not just the low poly positions, it's actually the high poly positions, which allows you to do a mask that is controlled and influenced by those details on the high poly map. You don't need the position map. If you don't have it, Instamat would use the geometry data as is, but then you can only do the mask on the low poly geometry, which means you would lose some detail. So it's always good to bake it. And so you can actually use that high poly detail for your masks on the low poly.
It's also worth mentioning one of the maps that we're not including here, which is a mesh ID map.
I don't know, we do include it here.
Oh, I didn't see it so far in the part. But I was saying, in this case, usually we don't necessarily need a mesh ID map for the various masks that we use, right?
Right. Indeed, if we mask by polygons or by submeshes, we don't need it. But if you have details that you only have in the high poly that you don't have on the low poly that you want to mask, you would still need a mesh ID map so you can per pixel select those details. The curvature map is also a pretty important map, and it shares the settings with the bevel baker, so you can find the settings up here in the curvature settings. And if I would enable the bevel normals, you'll see it's now called curvature and bevel normal settings, but I don't need the bevel normal, so I'll disable it. And we added this new mode for disk sampling and normal gradient. And the main difference is that the disk sampling works similar to a ambient occlusion sampler or a thickness sampler, where we don't just cast one ray to get the information from the high poly mesh. We would actually cast a number of rays to gather a bigger curvature, whereas the normal gradient would calculate the curvature map based on the normals that we're baking on the normal gradient. So you would get a much smaller gradient. So if you want to get the nicest and biggest curvature that's possible, you would want to use the disk sampling mode. And you can increase the sample count. And again, it's one of the reasons why the GPU Baker is nice, because you can use a lot of samples and it's going to look very nice. So that's the curvature sampler AO. I don't think we have to say much about AO sampling. It's the contact shadows that make the mesh pop and look very nice. And in real-time engines, you can use those for very dynamic and beautiful lighting. And the thickness baker allows you to do effects based on thickness. Like if you have rust and you want to apply your rust mask only on thin metal sheets, you could use the thickness sampler to build a mask that would then only apply to those thin parts on your mesh. So you would basically create a mask that uses metalness and also the thickness sampler, and then you can dial in where you want to have that rust.
Right, and I always use the thickness map for things like subsurface scattering and other renderers as well.
Yeah, fair point. That's a really, really good way to create a subsurface scattering mask as well. That's true.
Maybe less so for hard surface, but if you're doing something with plastic where light's shining through, you could do some really cool stuff with the thickness map.
Absolutely. So here's our crate. I baked the details. You can see them now here on the left side. And if you want, this is also a question, like how can we look at the bake information that we have in our viewport? And we added a node for this. Let me see where it is. I think it's here in mesh layering. You have that select bake data node, which is very interesting. You can use it for masks as well. But if I just drop it here, and then it looks weird, of course, because our default projection is triplanar. But once I switch it to UV, you can actually see all of your bake outputs, and you can select what you want to visualize in the viewport. For instance, we could choose to visualize the normal tangent, the world space normals, the position map, the curvature map. So that's a good and nice way to quickly just go through all of your different bake results. If you go to the thickness map, you see what the baker did here is that it recognizes that the box is very thick, but the handle is very thin. So the thick parts are black and the thin parts are black and the thick parts are white. And you can see that in areas where it's like somewhat thin, you'll get that gradient here because the ray casts through the mesh. All right, so to start texturing this asset, I would always start with the base layer and then work my way upwards in a rough outline and then refine. So to start, I would go to the material library here and search for some kind of a metal. Let's see if we find an iron here, dirt iron, greasy iron. Yeah, let's just take that dirty iron here and just drop it here. So that's our base. And the reason that I do this is to have a layer that shines through once we peel back the paint or we add some scratches, so that base metal shines through. So that looks pretty good. And then I'm going to create another layer here. So let's just add a multi-channel layer here. And we want to influence the height here, set maybe a height in the middle. That's for the paint. So we can always subtract and add a bit more information, a roughness, metalness, and a normal layer. And the reason we need the normal layer here is because you can see that the lower layer from the paint, from the metal, is shining through. So if we don't want this, we can just enable normal and then fill it with the default normal, that blue color, which just means it's a blank normal that's pointing outwards of the surface. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt there, Manfred. It sounds like we're having a little bit of some technical issues where the stream is starting to lag a little bit for everyone. So just want to make sure that we see your comments. And if there's anyone who's in the office, making sure that we have a strong connection, just want to give a little PSA there, just to make sure that we have a clean connection for while we are doing our stream.
Yeah, and
thanks guys for your patience.
Tell your colleagues in the office to maybe not use the upstream. Stop sharing your files. Yeah. Maybe chat can tell us when the upstream is good, so we know if we have to do some intervention here at the office. But
absolutely, keep us posted. I'm just looking at the chat as you go along. I didn't want to interrupt your flow there, but I want to make sure people can see all the educational goodness that's going on here. So hopefully the stream will clear up a little bit, and I'll keep you posted, Manfred. Maybe we can just continue otherwise.
Perfect. Right, let's go back then.
Awesome, yeah. So we were just talking about how you're enabling channels, right? And this is a little bit of a different behavior than what we had from early access with Instamet, right? Where now when you create new channels inside of layering projects, most of those channels are disabled by default for performance. So now that we're adding more things like the normal channel, the roughness individually, that gives us a little more control to tell Instamet what specifically we need for each layer.
Right, it's not just performance, it's also to avoid injecting data into the composition that you don't really need. And then you have to figure out why does it look wrong now, and you have to dial it back or disable the blend. So it's much easier to be able to control exactly if you want to, add the base color or not. This power button is really helpful. But another frequent question is like, how do you get the AO to render on the mesh? Right now you would have to add a new channel here. So you can click add channel and simply add your AO channel, and you can see the AO information is coming in. But what we can also see is that there's a contribution from the lower material here. So to avoid this, we just add another fill layer here on our base, and you can see that this controls AO now. And then as usual, you can disable and enable AO in the viewport by clicking on the AO button. But even if you don't do this, you can enable the ray tracing and get a really beautiful render of your mesh as you work. All right, so that's our paint layer. Let's pick a color for this one. Maybe like this. Let's disable ray tracing again and just AO. Actually, let me desaturate this a bit more. Yeah, let's just use this. So this is our base paint, and if you would have some mask on it, you would see the lower layer shine through. For instance, if I would add a mask to this, that's a paint mask, a mesh mask painting. I could now, if I set this to subtract, I can now remove the details here, and you can see that we can see that lower material shining through, and we get a nice gradient where we can see that there's some thickness to the paint layer, and you can control the thickness now by modifying the height level of your paint base layer. So that controls the base thickness of your paint. So is it very thick paint, or is it more a thin layer of paint? I'll leave it like this and remove my mask here. So so let's add another layer here to mask off some of our parts here. So that should be a metal layer. So I'll create a fill layer. And because it's metal, I use just white for the most part. And I'll add a metalness and roughness layer to this. And I'll increase the metalness to 100, so it's metal. And what I want to do then is I want to mask off the parts that are actually metal. And the easiest way to mask, so we can pick the parts that where we want to have our effect. And something, again, people ask often, like, how can you control multiple, how can you disable all of these at once? Do I have to click through? You actually don't have to do that. You can just right-click on the meshes here and then deselect all meshes, but you could also do something like just mask the ones that you want and then hit invert current selection, and you see it inverts it perfectly. But you can also pick in the viewport. So these are the metal parts that we want to mask off here. That looks pretty nice already. And you always want to have some pattern, some theme going on your asset that should be consistent across all of the assets in your game world. What I want to do here is maybe add another color to separate those attachment points better. So I'll create another multi-channel layer. It's going to be, maybe let's take this bright yellow, maybe a bit darker, more saturation, like this. And again, we're using the mesh mask. Deselect all, and for convenience, I'll hit the pick button. And then to pick more, I think I can hit shift, and then I can just pick multiple times, and I click in the onto the background to stop my picking, and you see it did a really nice job at picking our areas where we do want to have this attachment color. So that looks pretty good, but then we would want to have that secondary color more visible on the mesh. And to do this, I want to use a volume mask to mask off some parts of the mesh to just make it look a bit more interesting. So I click the add mask button here, and I'll choose the volume mask. And it's set to multiply, which means it combines with the lower mask. So if I move my volume away, let's move it a bit more up, you see that it only masks where you have this overlap between the previous mask, this one, and our volume. And we can control, you see there's a fall off here, which is pretty good by default. Having a bit of softness is always good to avoid aliasing. If your mask is too hard, it doesn't look as nice. But we'll just dial this down to 0. And then we can control where we want our mask to be, but we don't want it to multiply. We want it to add to our mesh, and then I can hit R to scale down and then move it down and maybe mask off the lower portion like this.
And this is one of those masks that uses the position baked data, right?
Exactly, if it's available. If it's not available, it's still going to work just fine, but I would recommend you to have the position data available. And then I'll duplicate the mask here and just move it to the top, and I'll mask off the top. Yeah, that already looks pretty cool. And to make it just look a bit more custom, not so boring, I'll take the lower mask, hit E to enter the rotation mode, and I'll rotate it a little bit and move it up just slightly so it looks a bit more interesting. And I think what's also nice is if you have a bit more separation when it comes to the roughness on your material. So right now we have the same roughness all over the asset, and what I want to do here is maybe select that layer, fill the roughness, and have it a bit lower so it looks more like some glossy paint layer here. And you can see that already looks interesting. And what you can do as well is add a bit of height information to further separate the different layers. And you can see that this adds this very nice portion where the light reflects and adds a very small, very nice highlight.
Nice.
Actually, you see, we have one issue here, and we masked the part here that we don't want to mask the metal part. And to fix this, we could now create another mask, and then so one way would be, I'll just show it. I'll create a mask here again, and we're going to set it to subtract. And then I'll deselect, and then I'll pick my part here again, and it works. So we basically removed that metal part from our mask, but it's much easier if you just have the right order in your layering stack. So in this case, I'll just move the metal part to the top, and it's correct again. Actually, we could make this a bit nicer if we add a small volume mask. If you look here, we don't just have the yellow paint on the top part, it's also on this part behind this attachment point, which I think would look a bit nicer if it would actually be green. So
yeah, I was going to say, you could use a volume mask, or you can even use one of our polygon selection masks as well to get more specific into that inside area.
That's a good point. I do like the volume masks. So I'll just use the volume mask here, and then I'll set this one not to add, I'll set it to subtract, and you can see how our mask is now modifying the mesh. So I'll just move it over like this, and then move it down a little bit to mask off that portion. And you see it extends way too long, so I'll just move it a bit forward, hit F to focus, again F to focus, and we masked out that portion. And if we select it again, we could actually control the softness here if we want to have a softer fall off here, or we just perfectly, shrink it down just a little bit so the bevel is nicely masked, and then add a bit of softness to it. Yep, like this. Great.
Nice. By the way, guys, if you have any questions, the stream seems to be doing a bit better now with the buffering, so that's great to hear. If you guys have any questions at all while we're doing any asset texturing or anything that Manfred's currently showing off, please feel free to ask. It's always great to know what you guys are interested in. There's a lot of really cool techniques in here that we're looking at, especially being able to use the volume mask to cut out more complex shapes. A lot of times people ask, is it possible to create a custom volume to be able to texture assets? And a lot of times what you could do is actually combine a lot of the primitives in the scene that we offer, such as like the cylinders or the spheres, the cubes, to be able to cut out very distinct shapes using the volume mask that way.
Absolutely. So what should we do next here, Jeremy?
Well, it's looking pretty clean right now. I'm wondering if we can roughen this up a little bit.
Yeah, we could do that, but maybe should we add a bit more details to it? I think we could add
Yeah, we
a
absolutely can.
decal, for instance.
Yeah, I mean, we just added a whole bunch of decals into Instamat's library, anywhere from sci-fi decals to kind of liquid
Yeah,
stain, stuff like
right,
that.
right. Yeah. There's different ways, so let's show maybe one or two ways to do this. I'll start off with the way that I like most, to be honest, to add a bit of decaling to the mesh when it comes to just one or two big hero decals. If it's a lot, I would use the brush, and then just add them by placing brush strokes all over the mesh. So let's add another fill layer here. And here's our fill layer. And how do we turn this into a decal if it's just a fill layer? Well, you could change the projection type to be a decal, and then you can just project on your decal this way. But I feel like a better way is to just keep it on the default settings. And then instead, what we're going to do, we keep the fill layer as is, but we add a mask, and we're going to use the mesh projected mask, which is a really great mask for many different reasons. And here you can see that now we have a mask that is doing a triplanar projection. But what we could do instead is switch that to decal, and then we can position and place our decal using a mask. And the benefit here to doing it this way is that you can still control your fill layer properties individually and mix it up as you would like to mix it up.
Exactly. So this separates the content from the visibility on the model. So you can always add more or less masks to this layer, but then you can choose, what's the color, what's the height, or the
Exactly.
patterns and things like that, and then use the decal as a mask instead to separate that out and give you a little more control. It also allows you to go back and change things too.
Yeah, and what I want to do here is maybe do some embossing with this decal. So to do this, I'll not just use the base color, I'll add my height. And as you see, if I increase it, you get a beautiful outwards shape here. But what I want to do is have that embossed in. So I'll just set it to subtract, and you can see how that adds my decal, and I can perfectly control how that decal is then being applied. So maybe like this, and maybe also change the roughness, make it a bit more rough here. That looks pretty nice. And then maybe just blend the base color in a little bit so it has more of an embossed look, just like this. But as Jeremy mentioned, there's more you could do here now. For instance, you could add a filter to your mask and then warp it. That's something you can do with the new build. For instance, I could use what do we want to use here? Maybe a slope blur.
Yeah, we can roughen up the edges there from the inset.
Yeah, so you can see here's our slope blur doing its magic. We can use a different noise if that is not doing what we want. So it's a bit too low. The frequency of the noise is a bit too low. We want to have a very fine noise. So I'm going to pick a noise that does what I want to do. Maybe take, I think a clouds noise could work here. Maybe clouds
sometimes
heavy.
they use the turbulent one or the clouds heavy. Yeah, that's a good one too.
And that's way too intense, so we can blur the noise a little bit, and the intensity would have to be very, very low, so I'll just set it to something like maybe 2%. And you can see how that now makes our embossing a bit more interesting, and you can control how that works, the maximum or the minimum blend to create a effect where the outside part is being blurred into the embossed part, or where you just break up the edges by doing a maximum blend, because now it just only goes outward, so that looks more plausible. Like this part here, for instance, looks a bit like you have a worn off edge now where something rubbed off against it. And again, you can even make that finer by lowering the blur. So this is a very powerful tool to create a very beautiful looking decal. So if you look at this now compared to what we had without the slope blur, so this is super clean, but it already looks a bit worn off. And then you can control exactly how intense, how that should be using the blur on the input noise, which is a very nice feature to better dial that in perfectly, just like this.
Yeah, and then if you wanted to change the color or how much the logo subtracts in from the surface, because we separated that masking out from the actual layer itself, you can always go back and non-destructively change that information.
Absolutely, and that's a great feature. I love when things are non-destructive. So you see I can change the blend mode and I can modify the height here, and everything would just work based on the masks we created.
Something also worth mentioning is that you're subtracting height information from the surface of the mesh. And so a lot of times people ask, how can I have negative depth in this case? How do I dive into the surface of a mesh? Maybe you can talk a little bit about how that works in Instamat.
I mean, like we did it here, right? You just set it to subtract, and then you can just dial it in the way that you want. And even because we set the height to use 16-bit FR, which means full range, which means you're not limited to set up your effect between 0 and 1. You can actually go negative, very far negative, or very far into the positive. And then there's a more advanced feature we added for some of the more advanced users, is that you can actually, if you right click here on the height, you can actually enter a value that's not just between 0 and 1. You can set it to 10, and you can see the effect is now much stronger. So you basically awesome. Subtract 50 units into the mesh here.
Very cool.
That's way
and
too
so
much.
Instamat behind the scenes is not only generating a height map, but it's using the height map information to generate the normal data, right?
Exactly. That's the beauty of this height workflow, that you can easily author beautiful normal details, but you don't have to struggle with the complexity of vectors and this kind of authoring. And your decals and alphas don't have to be normals. You can just use a regular height map and then drive your normals that way. And again, we can still move this around, right? It's non-destructive. We can still move this, rotate it, and scale it, and do whatever we want with this layer here.
Yeah, we got a question or a suggestion just from the chat. They're really interested in looking at how we were adding layer references to with the latest release. How we're able to reference information. We were kind of going into that a little bit with our effects with masks, but I figured I'd bring it up in case you were planning on showing that a little bit later. But there's people interested in looking at how we're using layer references, and also adding grunges to layers and things like that. Actually, the second part there, adding grunges to layers, one thing we don't show that often is using something like a generator and how generators work.
Right.
Maybe we can talk a little bit about how those work.
Yeah. Actually, I forgot this. That's a really important part. When you build a surface, even a plastic is not as perfect as this. So your plastic needs to have some micro variation, micro detail, and that's where the generator comes in. For instance, if we go to the paint layer, I can use a generator here to add a bit of detail. So I'll spawn a generator by clicking this button, and then I use a noise that works well for me. And in this case, I want to have something like a Perlin noise, just a lot of dots and smooth frequencies. It's right here. And you see this now affects any of the channels that we enable here. Right now it was affecting the ambient occlusion channel because we had it enabled up here. So up here you can select the default influence, and in other tools you wouldn't always need to switch between the different channels to modify the blend mode. But in Instamat you typically just have this on a base color and you're good to go, because you have that beautiful layer stack where you can control whatever what data you generate or composite here, plus you can always have access to all of the different blend modes, so you don't need it that often. But in this case, it controls what your default influence for the generator is. And what we want to do here is add some micro detail. So I'm going to go to that generator and increase the scale of my noise here. Actually, that should be way denser, so we can control that. We're not limited to going to the range we see here. We can hit the edit button and maybe go for a scale like 120, or we could even go to 140. And we can control the gamma, maybe like this. And then we can choose what we do with our generator if we go back to the blend settings here. And let's see what we do here. Maybe soft light, and then just you want to have very, very tiny influences here. Actually, maybe let's use a different noise. I think what might be better here is maybe the dense noise. And then again, let's crank that up so we can actually see it, and increase the scale of our noise function way higher. We need more. We need way more. Maybe like this. And again, we go back and just decrease the blend very, very low. So I don't know if you guys can see this on the stream, but we have very, very light, very small details here on our paint. I don't know if you guys can see that if I zoom in like this, but there are some shading differences here. But that's what makes your asset look much better when you look at the total of the asset. And also what you can use it for is to maybe add just a tiny bit of influence to the roughness map. And here what might be interesting to use is add subtract. So what add subtract does is it blends two things together, and some part will be added and some part will be subtracted. And basically the values that are below the midpoint of 0.5 will be subtracted, subtracted and the values that are above will be added. So that's interesting to not just add variation in one direction to your roughness map, but both in the positive and in the negative. So let's use add subtract here. And then if we crank this all the way up, you can see what I'm saying here, that some parts will get more glossy while other parts will get more rough. So if we look at the roughness map in detail, you can see exactly how that works. So if I would only have add here, everything would get brighter. If I have only subtract here, everything would only get darker. But add subtract allows you to go into both directions. So it's a very nice feature to perfectly dial in just some imperfections here on the surface.
So generators are really, really, really cool. I mean, I don't think they get as much love as they deserve, being able to add information to a layer and being able to composite it into the different channels in this kind of layer stack manner is a really cool way of working, especially for that micro detail that you're talking about. So if you have a grunge or some kind of element that's supplying image information, and then you kind of want it to push out the height a little bit or adjust the color a little bit, you want to kind of inject that image information, that texture into the layer that you're working on somehow, and blending it with a specific blending mode. You can do so very quickly just by using a generator. You don't need to kind of add multiple layers to the layer stack to get that done. It's a nice way to be able to just bring in some additional information into that one layer, and you can have it in that effect stack for that one layer in the stack.
Absolutely. I love it for these micro details, like to add some roughness variation, to add some color variation. It's perfect for this. And keep in mind, you have other blend modes. You don't have to use the soft light. You can even use something like hue or luminance to modify exactly how you're doing the blend, how you want to add that variation to your mesh. All right, so we have some variation here with the generator. I hope that helped the chat to understand how it works, and you guys can carry that knowledge forward for me. That would be fantastic.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think we also have a YouTube video on generators as well, even in use for something like material layering. When you're authoring your own materials using the layering system, generators are a great way to add micro detail that way.
Yeah, and what you should do as well is just make sure your layer stack looks nice and clean. So make sure to just double click it and then name your layers. Otherwise, if you have a big project, it will be difficult to find what you're doing. So this is our metal attachments and handles. And what do we have here? This is our MAT embossing. It's this guy right here. Right. And then we should probably group this and then just hit Command or Control G to create a nice group. And all of our layers are now here, and I'll call that the paint layer. So if I hide this, everything is gone. And another more important thing that people often forget is you want to have some weathering on the asset if it's an outdoor asset. And in this case, what I often used to do for my assets is to add some kind of a sun bleaching to the asset to make it look a bit more worn out. And that's also very easy to do in Instamat. So I'll add a layer here, and we just want to control the base color. And what I'm doing here is adding a mask next. And to fake that radiation on the surface, which is like sun hitting the top of it, I'll add a mask that's called the mesh direction mask. So I'll search for direction, and I'll find it here, the mesh direction mask, double click it. And you can see you can now control exactly how your mask works. So if I'll just solo that mask, right click and solo, you can see it influences, it creates a really nice mask that hits it from the top, or you can hit the asset a bit from the front, so it looks like you're burning in that light here. And you can, if you just want to have the top or maybe the front a little bit, you can control how that is being integrated as a mask by using the gamma to control the fall off, to create a more plausible fall off for your asset. And then unsolo this one, and again I'll use the soft light to blend it in a little bit. And I don't know if you guys can see that, but it just illuminates it a little bit. Maybe we should
Yeah,
change
it's
the
adding those
accent
fine
color here.
details, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's just the things that you kind of feel, not necessarily see. And there was actually, since you were showing that for like the light direction, the sun direction, we just added a light, baked light mask into our list of masks as well. I think is another great use case for adding that kind of baked in sunlight.
Absolutely. For sunlight, or if you do a stylized asset where you want to have a
Right.
specific light direction baked in, it's a perfect use for this. Right, so
We
have
actually have
our
a
bleach.
question, by the way. Um, since we were talking recently about generators, someone's asking, how do filters and generators function with layer groups? And so how can we utilize the power of groups to be able to take advantage of filters and generators in a very procedural way?
Yeah, that's one of the great features of Instamat is that you can actually put a filter on a group. That's something other tools can't do. And I love it for doing design reviews. So you can create a filter and, for instance, the HSL, or I prefer actually the HCL. You can just apply that to your whole group, and then you can look at your asset in different color variations and do a design review, or maybe just explore how would it look like if I just, actually I like this, for instance, if you just shift the hue a little bit to the right, the green looks a bit more interesting. Modify the chroma, desaturate it a bit, or add more saturation to it. So this is one of the great features of Instamat, to be able to put a filter on a whole group.
And you can create multiple versions of these HCL or HSL filters and just switch between them to see which variations you like.
Exactly. So let's rotate this one a little bit, and then I'll duplicate this guy, and then I'll move it back. Maybe do an HCL like this. And you see now we have, if you look at our layer stack, we have this duplicated one that's enabled and the low one is disabled. You see that it's grayed out a little bit, and it also has that box here, that empty box, which shows that it's disabled. And if I select both of those and I hit H, you actually toggle between them. You see now it shifts the box up and down as I hit H to hide the layer. So this is a great way to A/B test your filter to see which one you actually like better.
Nice. And just another question from another person in the chat. Kind of generalize the question. So he's asking, how do these workflows affect other project types like Udemy-based, projects, or maybe multi-material unified. So he's specifically asking, how do we add decals to surfaces in the Udemy workflow? But in terms of everything else that we're talking about, I think it all applies. How does this change using those different type of mesh configurations?
Absolutely, that's the beauty of Instamat, and that's the beauty of this multi-material unified workflow, and also the Udemy workflow is that everything what you see here will just work natively. And you'll be able to apply a decal that goes over many different Udemy tiles or many different materials if you use the multi-material unified mode.
Right. So when you're in a unified workflow with Instamat, it should just work. You can add a decal, you can add a projection mask, and then you should be able to apply it on the surface, 100%. Just like we're doing here.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of great things you can do here, right? You can use filters to invert your colors, or you can use filters to apply curves or color match some specific layer, to apply levels. And the great thing is the filter, you can always target a specific channel. For instance, you can target base color here, or you can target your roughness map, and then maybe tweak how your roughness map actually looks like if you feel like, oh, you overdid it a bit and you need to dial it down a bit. So you can dial down all of the roughness maps that are inside of that layer group using just a single filter on your group. A very beautiful feature.
I think that also brings up a great question. What distinguishes a filter from a generator from an effect, right? And so I think that was one of the main different aspects there. Was the filter is designed to control one specific channel in a layer group, right? Whereas an effect is able to generate and manipulate multiple channels at the same time of a single layer.
Absolutely. A good example for this is, for instance, if we, let's bring in or maybe just disable this guy right here. So go back to our base layer. And if I would apply a filter here like a swirl, let's see, do we have the swirl, or what can we do here? The shape mapper, sharpen. What's the most visible? I guess. Actually, maybe just use emboss highlight. So if we would apply a filter like this, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Let's use color match here. Yeah. So if we apply the color match, it would just target one channel. But if you want to do something that modifies multiple channels at once, like a swirl, you could use a effect. So if I apply a blur, or what do we want to apply here? A mesh blur, for instance. We could then control all of the channels at once. So now we don't just blur the base color. If we look at the roughness here, we will blur the roughness, we will blur the metalness, and all of our channels. So that's what an effect is doing if you want to modify all of your channels. But I think actually, shouldn't we have the swirl here? I think that.
Yeah, it's not one of the ones that
here,
that come up
perfect.
there. Yeah, great.
Yeah, so you see the swirl is now swirling all of our material at once. So you don't have to swirl each channel differently, or actually not differently, but independently, and then also make sure your settings always apply. So this is a very nice way to do it. And we also work on adding more specific effects, like for instance the material, not this one. Let me see. Yeah, this is the one, right? So for instance, this effect applies a paint layer to your existing material, and now you can control how the paint looks, how much paint you have on it. So these effects are actually very powerful, and we're going to add way more effects to the library. Right now we have a few of them. I think the paint effect is a really great one. If you have a base surface like a wood, for instance, let's just add a wood material. I think that looks a bit more interesting. If we take a nice wood like this one and we apply it to our mesh. And by the way, you can drag and drop those filters and effects. So I can just drag and drop my effect onto this, and you see it works. Now I have a material that's normally very difficult to do, which is a wood material that has some paint on top of it, and we can change the color here of our paint. And we can control the thickness of our material, the chipping, the aging of the paint, and we have a lot of control over all of the peeling effects here. So more peeling, you see now it peels more. You can control the roughness of your paint layer, make it more glossy, like thick paint. If we add a lot of the peeling, it looks like thick paint. And if we have very little of the peeling, it looks more like a thinner layer of paint. Chipping and cracks, there's a lot of control you have over that particular effect. So you see now we have all of these cracks, so it looks like very, very old paint. It's a beautiful filter. And there's more we're going to add here.
It's actually funny. Someone was just asking, they're mainly looking to ask about reference layers, but they were just asking how we could create a peeling effect. And we just so happened to do that right away. So that's pretty cool. Of course, you can do peeling effects with layer references and very specific things like that. But you can also just easily drag on a paint effect like that, as Manfred just mentioned. And we do have a question regarding how these effects work. So one person's asking, how are we able to choose our own noises or use our own custom nodes and use those as effects layering?
We'll look at this later if we still have time. I think we're already 1 hour in. I wanted to show so many things. Let's see if we can get to it. And then I'll show you guys how we could build our custom node using the atom graph and then use it as a filter in the layering workflow. That's something that I wanted to do actually, but let's see how far we get. And if we don't do it today, then guys, tune in next week. We're going to do another live stream if it checks out, if nobody gets sick, and then we can continue here. But let's just continue here with some wear and tear, I would say. So let's maybe add some scratches to this and make it look a bit more interesting, because right now it's way too clean for my taste. So we have our paint layer group here, and what we want to do to reveal the lower metal layer is to add some mask to our paint layer group so it reveals the underlying layer. And if you want to create scratches, we have a really nice mask for this, which is the mesh edge wear mask. So by just applying this, you see you already get some really nice effect work going on your crate, and we can perfectly dial in our effect. So let's see how we can do that. Okay, so we want to apply the scratches mostly on the edges, and down here we can control what scratches we're using. So by default it's using scratches 3, but we can actually change this if you want to have different kinds of scratches applied, like those structured scratches that are more longer. But I do want to use scratches 3 here. By the way, you could also use one of our new grunges that we added here. What's the name of the scratched one? Do you know it, Jeremy? We added a new grunge that is super scratched.
Oh man, it's on the tip of my tongue. We always seem to add so many with each release.
Yeah, what is it?
It wasn't the stylized one. That was the painted one. I'm looking for the scratched one.
It's not swiped out.
Oh, yeah.
Is it scratched?
It might be.
It might be scratched.
Yeah, let's see.
Yeah, let's just proceed with the scratches number 3.
Yeah.
That's a good one to just illustrate how that works. All right, so here's our scratches. And what's pretty nice about this node is you have a lot of control over how you want to apply those scratches. For instance, I can choose to have them on the large curvature here, large opacity. So if you want to have scratches only on the small areas, the small curvature, we could just use the medium, fine, and sharp. And then if you want to have it on the larger ones, we can have it, we just dial up the large intensity. If we want to break up our scratch mask a bit more, we can use grunge variance. If we want to add more grunge in general, we could just increase the grunge opacity. So we'll just dial that in a bit and then maybe add more scratches. As you guys can see, we have a lot of scratches here already. Yeah, maybe like this, start with a lot of those bigger scratches. Some bumps. Bumps is also very nice because you can add those not just scratches but bumps on your mesh that make it look a bit more realistic as well. I actually think our paint layer is a bit too thick. Let's decrease it, because otherwise you see if it's too thick, the scratches, you'll see that it looks wrong, because now the scratches look like they are carving out huge pieces, which is an indication that you need to lower the height of your paint layer so it looks more natural. You see, if I lower it, the scratches start looking way more realistic than if it's like this. Here it looks almost like we're scratching through butter or something like this. So we're lowering the height here to have the scratches look more realistic. Go back to our scratch mask, maybe lower the grunge opacity. We only want to have the scratches visible here. And then we can control how many of those we want. I think that actually looks pretty good. And then I think what would make sense is to add more of those. So you typically want to have several different layers of scratches. It's like if you want to render the ocean, if you just use one noise function, it's not going to look nice. You're going to have to use 2 or 3 or 4 different noise functions so your ocean starts looking realistic. So I'll just duplicate this node here, and you see if I duplicate it, it looks exactly the same because the seed didn't change on duplicate. So I'll have to change my seed here so the node looks a bit different. And I also have to change my seed down here, and then you'll see you'll get very different scratches. But for the fine scratches, I want to have a higher scale on the scratches. And again, not so much on the grunge opacity. And with the grunge mask, you see you can control the breakup. If I lower the grunge mask, you'll have a lot of scratches. And if I increase the grunge mask, we'll have a much nicer breakup. Yeah, that starts looking really cool here with those multiple layers of scratches. And can also control how intense our scratches look if we control the brightness. So if I control the brightness and I crank it all the way up, you'll see it. You basically see the masked area, so which is way too high. So don't go too far. You see not visible, and if I go up, you can see it much better. And then you maybe want to have a bit more breakup in the mask.
It's one of my favorite parts about texturing. It's just finessing these details.
Yeah, you can really get lost in those. But typically you just have to modify brightness, balance, and maybe contrast to get your mask to be looking a bit more interesting. But I do think that looks pretty nice. And then we can actually add maybe another layer of scratches. And this time maybe less dense. You know what, actually, what we have here is, this looks pretty interesting, but it's mostly around the curvature. What we need is scratches that are actually also on the front of the crate and other parts. Otherwise, it looks a bit weird if we have all of the curvature scratched up, but the front is perfect. So to do this, I'm just going to add a projected mask again. And as input, we're going to use, again, one of our scratches here. Let's see what we have here with the grunges. Actually, we could use the structured here. And then what we're going to do is subtract. So you see we have the scratches it's actually too structured. Let's change it again and use scratches 3. And that starts looking more interesting. We want to have more of those, and maybe we can control the orientation. So now it's all over the place, but I think typically the crate would get scratched more horizontally because people would walk by and then scratch it, or it's got moved along a wall. So it should be more horizontal. So to do that, we can just control the rotation, and I'll set the variance to 0. And you see now we get all of these long horizontal scratches, and I'll make them a bit smaller, and it starts looking really reasonable. And we can control how many we want by using the tile multiplier here. Like this. You see that starts looking really plausible, like we have those scratches that then go into the curvature. I really like how that looks.
While you're on the scratches, we've got a question about like how would we mask out a portion of those scratches in the corner? You know, how do you remove scratches in a particular place in a, kind of like with painting, for example?
Yeah, exactly. You could, for instance, now if you want to do that, you could just add a mask, and now you use the painting mask and you set that to add. So again, by default, it's a white mask, and we basically subtract the scratches from our mask. And to now remove some scratches, we can use add to add back that information. For instance, here that scratch should probably end because this is a bit more inside, so it's less plausible that we would have some scratches here inside the crate. So you can refine your asset if you feel like that's really needed. Or here behind the handle, maybe. Actually, I'll undo that. I like that. Because when the handle hits the crate all the time, it should look a bit messed up, right? But maybe here on the attachment, I can lower the flow a little bit to not remove so many details, but just have the scratches be a bit more light here on the handle. And the same here, just have the scratches be a bit more light on the handle. But by and large,
about your painting, we have a comment that one of the things that someone's having difficulty with is being able to change brush properties on the fly. So we actually have some keyboard shortcuts to do things like changing the radius of the brush. Do we have some other shortcuts as well?
Yeah, I mean, the radius, that's Command Control and then click, and then, drag the mouse, and then you can also change the flow easily if you do the same, but with the right mouse button. So if I go up and down, I can easily control the flow of my brush right here.
Great. And we also added recently some neat widgets to the viewport when painting, like being able to pick colors and change values as well. But we're getting off track. So I just want to make sure that we do address a few of those questions.
Fantastic. Yeah, so we can just paint and add in details where we want to have scratches or no scratches, so I can paint them all out here. And if I want to bring them back, I can just hit the eraser button right here and then just paint and bring them back. So you can perfectly control how your asset looks like when you author it. And the nice thing is here that the paint you do, that's basically, that's not depending on the seed or the randomization, because if I would change the seed, all the scratches would change, but the areas where I masked it out, they would remain. So you can make sure that if you have an area like here, that embossed part where you don't want to have any scratches, or maybe here, we can just cancel those scratches out. And then if we change the seed, the area would remain clean. Yeah, so this looks pretty nice already, I believe.
Yeah, it's looking great. I really like the detail around the edges. I think the additional scratches around where the handler was a nice touch as well.
Actually, what we should do is also bring that, we only did the generator base variation on that green part. We can actually just duplicate that generator and then drag it onto our accent color as well. So we have the same kind of color variation on our more glossy part. And we can even make that more pronounced, or actually we don't want to make it more glossy, we just want to make it less glossy. So I'll just switch to add and then just add it in a little bit. Like this. Right. Very nice. Yeah, so I think this asset already looks pretty plausible. And again, that's why we did the base iron layer here, right? If I remove this, then you'll see it's just black. And if you would just, of course, you could just create a multi-channel layer. And then what you could do is you could set that to white. And then you basically make it metal and add some roughness to it. You see, you can see the scratches, but they're all just pure metal, which might be good in some cases. But if you, by the way, I can do the same thing that I did for the filter. I select the disabled layer. and the enabled layer, and if I hit H, it toggles between those, so I can A/B test this. So if I use the actual material, you'll see that automatically we get this rust and the nicer variation that shows below our paint here for free, which I really like. That's why I always start with like a really plausible base material, and then I add my layers on top.
You can almost think about it like you're building the object yourself, right? How would I construct the crate initially? It would probably be maybe some kind of metal first, and then you can build the paint on top of it. And then if you add stickers or decals, you can build on top of it that way. So it's very kind of a physical way of texturing something.
Absolutely. What we forgot actually is we wanted to show how we can do decals with a brush. So maybe let's take a look at how we can add some screws and details to our crate using the brush. So I'll create a brush layer, a multi-channel brush, and what I want to do is add some scratches not scratches but screws to my layer here. And to make that very easy, I can just set up my base fill properties as I want them. So I know I want to have metal screws, so again I remove the saturation here. I'll add some height because I want them to stick out a little bit, and then I want to set my metalness to 100 as well. So if I would paint, you see now you get these. It already looks actually like screws here, but this looks way too basic, and I'll undo it. And what I want to do actually here is use one of our decals. So with this release, we added tons of decals to Instamat, and they're all procedural. So you can do some really interesting things. So if you change your brush, you don't have to just use a brush mask. You can go to the decals category and then pick one of those 200 decals that do exactly what you want, from screw heads to bolts to buttons to cracks, to add more detail to your mesh. So let's see what we want here. A bolt, screw, what do we want here? Maybe just this regular bolt here. So I picked it, and if I now click that onto my layer, you'll see that I automatically get this very, very nice looking bolt together with the washer below it. So let's just make that very small, and then we can add some bolts here to our crate, maybe here and then here as well, and you can see how you can, bolt your things together. Was one too much.
What's really cool about using these built-in decals is that they're all procedurally generated as well. They all give you controls to be able to design and craft not just the one bolt that you chose in the browser, but really kind of any type of bolt that you want. So always know that when you're picking a decal and you're looking at something in the browser and it's like, all right, that kind of looks like what I'm looking for, but maybe, the turn part of the screw could be a little bit smaller. You can most likely be able to adjust it and finesse the decal to get the one you're looking for.
Absolutely. And with the linear stroke, you can also just click here and then hold Shift and then set a series of bolts across your mesh or stitching or any other type of effect. And we're working on curves, by the way, so curves will be available soon. So you could draw a curve on your mesh and then it would place all the decals, all the screws, but you could still modify the curve, drag the points around, and everything would just work. So that's going to be a really nice feature as well. So we can just add a few of those bolts here. Maybe
while you're adding some details, I'm going to give you a question that's a little more out of left field, but we can always go and continue detailing while you answer it. Someone's asking, what about LUTs? Are there plans to add LUTs or color maps, things like that to Instamat? I'm not entirely sure if the question is based on something like lighting in the viewport or a specific type of filters, but if you're looking for a way to be able to visualize your scene in a particular style or look, you can absolutely do so by bringing in your own environment image and background if you need to, or be able to customize the viewport with different tone maps, which I think it looks like, Manfred, you're kind of pulling up there.
Yeah, exactly. And you can also always write your own viewport shader to do whatever tone mapping you would want to do. But we're going to add OCIO, I think it's called, to Instamat, so you can load in all of the color lookup tables that you would want into Instamat. But we added 2 new tone map operators to Instamat, is PBR neutral and AGX. I like PBR neutral. It's a bit dark by default, but if you brighten up the viewport, the colors pop really nicely.
Nice.
Already looks really nice. Yeah, so we have some bolts here. I actually also used the bolts to, add some detailing here onto that attachment point, and we could do the same here as well. I just make my screw smaller and then just tap it 2 times onto my handle to make it look a bit nicer here.
I was actually going to say you could use symmetry in that case, right, to make it a little
Absolutely, yeah.
easier. But
Yeah, I could use the
that's
symmetry
nice.
plane to do that here, to mirror my stroke across. It's actually a really good point. We could just place a decal here and then also here, and you see how it nicely mirrors our bolts. Just some small details.
Right. And let's say, for example, someone wants to use the height information that we're uh, painting on with our decals to add some rust around those screws. How could they go about doing that?
Yeah, that's where you could use references to use the mask that you've generated to influence another layer, basically. For instance, just if I would just quickly do that, I would add a reference point here to my layer, and then I could create a new mask or a new fill layer. And let's say this would be red, and we can create a mask for this. And the mask is not a regular mask. We use the reference generator here to generate a mask that's based on one of our previously generated references. And I can also rename this to bolts. So now we renamed the reference that I generated here to bolts. And if I go to the reference generator here, I can find it by selecting the bolts and then choose which channel I want to map. And I want to map base color. But I actually don't want to map just the base color. What I want to map is the alpha channel of the base color, and that would be basically exactly the area where you painted. And you can see it now selects those areas precisely. And we could do an effect on this with the new ability to add mask effects. So in this case, we could, for instance, add, what do we want to add here? A filter. A slope blur is pretty good here, but again, we would need to have a super low intensity. We might need to refine this for layering, because typically the intensities are good if you build a material, but for layering you would need to have like 10x, 100x lower intensities for the most parts, because the UV space is just so small that you need to have much smaller intensities. But in any case, let's find a good noise function here. So what could be a good one for us here? Maybe again the clouds. Clouds is so versatile; it always works well. So let's use cloud smooth here.
Turbulent also is a good one.
So maybe like this, and then we set it to maximum because we want to bleed out the area. Maybe blur it a little bit, or keep it like this. It's also fine actually. So we can bleed out the details a little bit, but you can see we overlap the screw, which we actually don't want to do. And the reference, when you use a reference in the layer stack, it always has to be above the point where you generate the reference. So if I would move this layer down, because it should be below the screws, you see now you get this red exclamation mark here, and it tells you, hey, this is an invalid reference because it has to be above the bolt. So let's move it back up. So Instamat is happy. Now Instamat is happy again. So how can we fix this, right? How can we now have the red part? Let's actually make that a bit more visible. Let's add some roughness here, and we also don't want this to be metal. So no, actually let's give it a bit more of a rusty like color, something between red and brown, I guess. So how can we avoid this from being visible on the screws? And the way to do this is actually a pretty neat hack, or not hack, but workflow. Like it's like building materials, or in Instamat, it's very easy. All you have to know is how to do it. And learning Instamat, or learning how to build procedural materials, is not so much about learning some specific technical quirks. It's just knowing which workflow you need, which nodes you need to place somewhere to make it work. And what we want to do here is actually we want to create another mask, and we want to again add a reference generator here and use the same reference here from base color alpha, but this time we don't want to multiply, we want to subtract. And you can see how that works, right? We now have our part behind. Let's actually make that more visible. Let's just use some funky blue color. So you see we basically just, before we had our reference and we smeared it around with the reference generator and the slope blur. And what we now do with the new reference generator that uses the same input but set to subtract is we mask out that part again. So our screw remains unaffected, basically. And we can also, if I want to make that more visible here behind the screw, my mask, I could go to the reference generator here. And a pretty neat feature is that you can actually control the intensity of the mask you generate. So you see, if you want to have that rust or whatever we're doing here more visible, you can just move down your levels to make it more visible, or control the midpoint to control the fall off. So now we could make that some other color again. maybe like this. And the neat part is that this would now apply to all of our screws that we have, right? If I disable this layer, you can see that it adds a really nice darkening effect around our screws. And there's a lot you can do with here. You could modify the height map too. You can create some bulging around the screws so it looks indented. Actually, let's just see what happens if we do add some height information here. So you can see now it bulges here around the screws. I don't know if you guys can see that, but we could also
yeah, that's great.
We can also subtract this. So it bulges. Yeah, that actually looks pretty interesting, right? So now it looks like the bolts actually bend the metal a little bit inside. So you see here, for instance,
because if you imagine if they're tightening it, right,
exactly,
it's going to pull in some of that metal a little bit.
Yeah, and in some parts it was a bit too sloppy, so you didn't drill right. It's a pretty nice effect. I actually like this, so I'll keep it. And then instead, I'm going to just lower the blend effect of my base colors to have the effect a bit more neatly integrated. Actually, very nice. Yeah, that makes me want to add another effect to this crate. It's already so bumped up. Let's add some more wear and tear to this crate. So I'm going to add another multi-channel brush layer to it. And what I want to do it is add some dents and, like really big distortions on the crate. And I don't want to do this using the base color layer, so I'll disable it, but I do want to add some information to my height channel. So let's see, if I would just paint that here, you can see what we have, this bump here, but it looks really weird. But what we can do instead is maybe go to our decals, and we might have some shapes here that actually look good. So you see we have those dent shapes here, dent folds, dent circular. Let's just use that circular dent, and let's see what we can do here. We can warp the dent around, can blur it a bit, maybe that might be good actually. And now if I paint that on it, you can see we get a much more interesting shape here. So, and to make that easy, I can go to my dynamic. So I don't want to have each dent be in the same orientation, the same size. So what we want to do here first is to add some spacing to our brush stroke. So when I paint over it, it looks a bit more dynamic and spaced out. And then we add some rotation to it. And also we want to have different intensities for our dents, and maybe also some size variation, and just jitter the position a little bit. And now I can basically paint over my asset, and you see we dent it in, but I think we can actually make that brush much bigger than it is right now to have those really big dents in the crate. Yeah, that actually starts looking more reasonable with the dents. Can you see this? I don't know if you can see it on the stream, but it dents it up nicely.
Yeah, slightly.
Yeah. It's subtle, but that's exactly what I want on my crate. So I can just paint over my crate here, and it's going to do exactly what I want to do. And all I have to do is just paint loosely over it to achieve exactly the effect that I want to achieve here.
One question that came up while you were talking about reusing these effects over and over again is that we can, I guess the point is that if you want to save an effect that you've created using these reference layers, you can do that, right? There's a way where you can save a few layers and create smart materials so that you can easily instance them back in or reuse them in other scenes, right?
Absolutely. For a brush, you could, there's two ways you can just save your layer as a smart material, but for brushes, you can just add the whole brush configuration as a brush template, and then it's going to show up. So if I want to save this, I can just add to library as brush template, and I'll call it my dent brush, and I'll hit OK. And then if I go to my library, I'll be able to find that here on the paintbrush. I'll have my dent brush right here. And if I can just double click that. So if I create a new layer, new multi-channel brush, I can just, you see now it's a regular brush again. But if I double tap this guy, it updates my brush, all my settings, my decal, and loads all of those settings back in. So you can create a nice big library of different brushes.
Right.
I think what could also work is a regular fold here. Yeah, I think that's enough here for when it comes to the dent. Looks actually pretty interesting. All right. And we can also actually, I think that would also be nice to show you the splats. I really like the splats that we have, those splat decals. Yeah. So let's add some color splats to our crate, so I can go to the decals again. And if you search for the splats, you have a lot of really interesting ones. We call them blood drop leak here, but it's not just blood. You could imagine somebody is using like a paint gun and just splat some color onto it. So let's just increase our brush here. And this is some paint, so we're gonna lower our roughness. And then we can splat our color onto the crate. For instance, if I click here, you can see that we have a very nice splash here. We can control the dryness of our splash. We can control how many splashes we have. So this decal gives you a lot of control over the splash, the spread, the length of the leaks. And the great thing is you have a lot of variation here. So each one of the different splashes you apply to your crate can look entirely different. So you can create something that looks really, really fun, really interesting, very easily by just, applying a splash, changing the seed, tapping it onto your crate. That looks pretty interesting. Let's maybe add some more splashes to it.
One of the things that's really cool about this is as you're painting and using these decals is you got to remember that with Instamat, everything is still being, procedurally driven behind the scenes. So if you wanted to, export this at a different resolution, you can very easily just change the resolution on the fly, and your paint brushes and paint strokes will appear even higher resolution than when you originally painted them, which is pretty cool.
Absolutely. And now it's very clean. If we want those splats to look a bit more worn up, again, we could just use a mesh projected mask. And then we could use one of our really nice looking grunges. For instance, I think swipes could work well if somebody tried to wash them off or clean it up. You see it, we just apply that swiped out and it looks really, really nice. We can control the density of our swipes to swipe them all away or just a little bit and just have the effect look very nice. Again, the contrast is also a really interesting way to control how it looks like. Is it freshly swiped off, or is it a more harsh, did the paint stick harder to the surface? And then we can also always control the blend of the overall layer if we want those splats to be fully visible or just slightly visible. And actually going back to the scratches, something you should always do when you do scratches or in general for your asset, always apply a bit of sharpening to it. So that's what I'm going to do next. So I'm going to go to my paint layer with the scratches on the group. So these are our scratches. If I want to apply a filter to make the scratches pop a little bit more, I can just go to the filter button with a mask selected and then choose the sharpen filter right here. And you can see they pop a lot already, but we just want to add a very, 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 very subtle slight sharpening on our scratches. You see how they pop a bit more?
Yeah, that's nice. It's a nice way to kind of like solidify the object together to make it a little more, not necessarily realistic, but like something that you expect to see in the game, or something where it just draws the eye a little more than if it were just kind of plain. Yeah, we always think about how when you texture an asset, you're trying to make something that looks like realistic, like in the real world. But really what we're trying to do is create things that are idolized, in the sense that everything that we make, from characters to props, it's always still a little bit past reality, and adding that little sharpening effect, little tweak to it, gives it that extra pop that you would expect from an asset like this.
I agree. I typically don't just do it on the masks. I would do it on my base color as well, and that's again a really amazing feature of Instamat, and the ability to add not just filters on masks and layers, but also on groups. So again, we have this sharpening filter, and again, I don't know if you guys can see that on the stream, but if I toggle that on and off, they just pop a bit more and it just looks a bit more interesting. But the same will apply to our whole object if I would add a sharpen filter here on my group. And we just do that very, very, very subtle. Just a very small sharpening of our base color here.
This brings up a really cool point we were talking a little bit about ago, where the way that groups work in the layering engine and how it passes data through from groups into information below it. Let's say I wanted to apply a filter or an effect across everything that was below the layer in the stack. How would we do that? because we're adding a sharpening filter.
Yeah, we can look at that later if we get to the
Sure.
atom graph example. I would love to show this, so maybe we should just accelerate and keep it moving. So I'll keep that sharpening here going, or actually, you know what, I'll keep it here for the moment, and I'll later show how to apply it to all of our effect work, because what we really need here is some weathering, and that's still missing. So there's two ways to do that. One way would be to go to the layer materials, and layer materials are different from regular materials. Layer materials are like prefab materials or templates. You drag them onto your layering stack, and they would unfold, and all of the different components would be editable in the layering stack. So I would just take that dirt rainy and then just bring it into my layering stack and drop it here, and you see immediately your asset is almost fully completed. And you see it didn't just bring that layer, it brought in with it all of those different layers to create the effect. Like you have the global dirt, and then you have a bit more dirt at the bottom here, this bottom fade, and then also the water leaks. But I think it would be interesting to show you guys how to build this. So I'm going to add a multi-channel layer here, and I'm going to take this very dark, super dark, almost black brown color here, and I'll add a roughness of 100%. But what I want to do here is to then mask it off so it actually looks like dirt. And you can do that using mesh projected mask and just applying it over and over again. But this is the point where the mesh mask builder comes in super handily. So I'm going to use the mesh mask builder to add a grunge here and set it to 1. And I'll pick probably one of our spots. Let's take spots maybe 7. And I'll apply it to the crate like this. And let's see how spot 6 would look here. Yeah, I think 7 is a bit more balanced. Yeah, let's take spot 7 here. So you see we have the dirt all over our asset, and we can control the balance of our mask and control the contrasting to make it look a bit more interesting. So you see by controlling the opacity of grunge 1, I can control how that blends in. But what's pretty nice is that you also have grunge 2. So I could add another grunge to this mask here, and let's take spots 6 here, which is a bit harder. And you see now we can comp within the mask builder, we can create this kind of layering of 2 different noises. And what's interesting is you can't just go from 0 to 1, you can actually go to negative. So you can, the one grunge 1 produces information and grunge 2 takes it away again, and you can create a more interesting looking effect this way by not having it all over the place, but thinning it out a little bit. And then I can also use a axial gradient, and again, if I just add that in, you see it adds it it makes it stronger at the bottom. But what we can do as well is we could invert the y-axis to have it stronger at the top, but instead we can actually just take it away from the from the top by going minus as well. So you see if I go to -1, you'll see the top is perfectly clean, and we have some dirt here at the bottom, and this way we can fake that effect of having more dirt at the bottom of the material.
This is something I do almost with every single asset that I use, using the mesh mask builder, taking one grunge, even if it's like putting some edge wear around the curvature, right? I'll enable the curvature, for example, and then I'll subtract away from the curvature with another grunge, using that negative option, sliding it to the left there.
Absolutely, and then we can add more layers here to our dirt. So I can add another one. I just duplicate the mask. And keep in mind, again, your seeds, they will repeat, so you would want to shuffle the seeds around a little bit because this is duplicated. And this time we don't want to have the axial gradient, so I'll remove the gradient here. And the masks are to multiply. What we want to do here is to add our masks in. But this time you see our grunges are all over. What I want to do is create a bit of dirt in the occluded areas, because that's where typically more weathering accumulates, right, in the cavities. So to do this, I can use the layer ambient occlusion, and I'll increase that to 1, and I'll also increase the brightness and maybe the blur. And if we disable the grunges again, we should be able to see how that looks like if we change the balance. You see all the areas that are occluded are driven by our ambient occlusion map that we baked, but it's way too consistent. So what we can do next is to use the negative feature again to break up these parts a little bit. So I'm using the grunge, the spot 7, and I'll set it to negative. You see, if I set it to 0, the ambient occlusion is perfect, but once I set it to -1, it subtracts those parts. And I think here it could be interesting to also increase the contrast a little bit so it looks a bit more contrasty, a bit more interesting in those areas. And you can also control the overall visibility of your mask with the global setting. So if I want to have the dirt way more intense, I can use the brightness global on the mask builder or the global balance to control exactly how the dirt looks like. All right, and then next what we would want to do is most likely add another mask builder, or we could use the mesh projected mask. Let's use mesh projected mask. And then here we can use a different type of grunge. Let's see what we have here, the moisture leaks, and we subtract out the moisture leaks. So it looks like the weathering is more, washed out from the rain. And I can scale my projection here to have the leaks be more, smaller or bigger. And we can also control the influence. Maybe not, let's not wash everything away, but just a little bit of it.
I got a question about the Mesh Mask Builder. In Mesh Mask Builder, curvature and edges works with both respecting the baked normal map and height map, plus the previous layer data. I guess they're kind of wondering what influences the Mesh Mask Builder.
Yeah, the curvature just here is using the baked mesh data. So if I have local details, it won't be captured. But as you can see, we have a lot of, because we had the screws in the high poly, they are part of the curvature map. So you can use it to actually add a bit more dirt around the edges or around the cavities, which is actually a good idea to not just use AO here, but also use the curvature together with our AO. And we can also use the layer ambient occlusion if you want to have dirt accumulated around the height parts that are just based on the composition. So layer ambient occlusion is basically just this. You see it even collects the dirt now here in the scratches, because it's actually understanding now that we're embossing here the Instamat decal and we have the scratches on the material. So this allows you to drive those effects. So once again, if we remove the layer ambient occlusion, or we bring it in, you can see even how our screws start accumulating the dirt around the screws and those details. You can control the brightness, the intensity, the radius, how big it is, and the bias. So if you want to have
layering ambient occlusion. Yeah, go ahead, man.
If you want to have a lot of small details, you would want to set the bias very low. If you want to capture just very big height differences, you want to increase the bias. So that's the value of the bias. So here we want to have the scratches, so very low bias.
For those of you that are wondering what the difference between that ambient occlusion and layering ambient occlusion is, it's Manfred mentioned it's instead of using the baked ambient occlusion from the mesh, generating from the geometry, we're using the height data from the materials and the textures that we're adding into the layer stack. So when you have a material that has height information that didn't, the height information isn't coming from the actual crate geometry that we're looking at here, but actual height data that we're generating with materials, then we can actually create this usually often called micro detail, micro height, micro normal, stuff like that. That's what that layer ambient occlusion slider is referencing.
Absolutely. And you can see, because we use triplanar for our projection here, some of the details repeat, but that could be easily fixed if you, for instance, add a mask for the brush with the mesh mesh mask painting. Here you go. And then we set it again to subtract, and we should use probably a brush that's more grungy. So what do we want to use here? Maybe just one of our grunge maps. Let's say we use the cracked one, yes. And instead of just painting it on like this, we can use the projector, and then we can paint our details over our mask. I'm not sure why this isn't working correctly. This should be.
In this case, I think it references the map at the bottom of the mask instead of the brush mask itself. So at the very bottom there,
the output here.
I believe that's the one that it references for the projector instead of the actual brush stencil itself.
Thank you. That's a really good point. So we can then, instead of doing it this way, we can just use a graph and plug it into our brush output here. Correct. Perfectly. It's good to have you here, Jeremy. Thank you for saving my ass, man.
You're so welcome.
Yeah. All right.
But also combining those two, right? Doing both a brush that has details in it and also the projected content itself having details in it is a great way to kind of have double duty, right? Where you can project neat information and detail there, but then also have the brush have some, different details in the actual mask itself is really helpful.
Absolutely. So you could just paint that over here and then have it look a bit more different. But there's actually another way that we could do, and I think that touches on something that's rarely used. And in this case, we can do a. What could we do to break this up? Does it work with? I think it does work. So let's use the mesh projected mask again. Because we have some noise functions that they are not projected onto the mesh, but they're actually using the mesh information itself. So let's do that. Let's add a mesh projected mask. And you see it projects the back here again. But what we could do instead is use a specific noise function that's specific to meshes. So if you go to mesh noise, we have a lot of noise functions here, like the simplex noise and the wavelet. So let's use the simplex noise. And then because it's a mesh noise, we have to set it to use the UV transformation. But what you can see here is it now breaks up our mesh very nicely, and it doesn't repeat, because now it doesn't look at the front and the side projection. It actually looks at each position in the 3D volume of the mesh to create the noise, and we can increase our scale here, and you can see how that now blends in with our mesh like this. And then we can maybe increase the gamma here. And
so you could think of this as 3D noises in a way. It's kind of meshes that are not just using X and Y coordinates, but also the noise goes in three-dimensional space according to the mesh itself.
That's exactly what it's doing, yeah. And you could you can even duplicate this and have another one, change the seed and just mix it up a little bit to add even more variation, have a smaller scale to break it up a little bit better. And you can see that breaks up that repetition fairly nicely. Again, if we would want to level up our noise a bit more visible, our dirt, we can add a brightness and contrast filter and then control the brightness of our noise to bring back all of that information. And I think maybe we want to decrease the... You see, that's why having names is a good thing, because now I don't know what mask is doing what, but you can just double click and also call this leaks. Now I know it's the leaks, or this guy right here, I don't know what this was. This was some of the overall dirt. And we can reduce our leaks and maybe subtract them a little bit less from our mask.
I believe it's possible to solo the mask of the mesh noise, right? Someone's asking, how can I view that 3D noise on the mask, or sorry, on the mesh itself?
Yeah, exactly.
Is that possible?
You can just solo it. Right-click on a mask and solo. The tricky part is it still uses your blend information currently. Actually, that's also something we want to work on. So keep that in mind. You would have to make sure that your blend mode matches what you want to see in the viewport. So if you would just want to see the noise, you would need to set it to default, and then you can look at your layer independently. Which is important sometimes because you want to understand how it actually looks when it's composing with a white mask below.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Someone said best pro tip there was naming your layers. I agree.
Yeah, and maybe add some grease to it. I think that's also very important. So grease is just a bit of spotty details on the mesh, so we can solo that layer. Maybe we'll be able to see it. Yeah, so here you can see the leaks, the grease. So that adds a bit of interesting roughness information. So add that to your mesh as well. And I think what would be nice is also a dust layer. Just cover your mesh in some very, very fine spotty details. You can do that using a multi-channel layer and then blending that in with the generator, etc., etc. But I think we can just keep the crate as this. I think this is a good example about how you could end-to-end texture an asset. And I've been working pretty slow on this asset. Normally I would do it much faster. So if I would start this from scratch, I would probably arrive here in maybe 10, 15 minutes and the asset would be fully textured.
And then you could save it out as a smart prefab material, and you could reuse this in multiple projects and make it done even faster.
Absolutely. But there's one thing we wanted to show, right? It's like, how can we create a pass-through layer? And one way to do this is you just create a layer group. So now we have an empty group. And then you can apply an effect to this if you just add an empty layer to it, like this. And now whatever you do on the group will affect everything below it. So for instance, if you now do an HSL, you can modify all of the data, all of your project, because now the empty layer together with the group will turn this into a pass-through layer, and you can modify everything, which would then, in this case, I would probably go for a sharpen. So let me type sharpen here, search everywhere and take the sharpen and just very faintly use it. By the way, the grid you see here, that's the UV. Keep in mind that some of those filters work in image space, so you have to be mindful not to increasing the range of your filter too much, or you're going to see the UV shells. We're going to add a sharpening that works on the mesh very soon, but keep that in mind while it's still an image space effect, that you might have those things to look out for.
So this pass-through layer that we just made, you can kind of think of it like an adjustment layer if you're editing video or a photo, right? Everything below this, group with the empty layer in it, everything underneath it is going to be affected completely. And then you can build on top of that if you want to and go higher in the layer stack if you want.
Exactly. Yeah, I think it looks pretty nice.
Yeah.
So, and then if you want to use this in our renderer or our game engine, we could just, I actually didn't save this project at all. So I probably should hit Command or Control S to save my project and then save it on my live stream demo on my desktop. Yeah.
It's also worth noting that we have autosave as well.
Yeah.
So that's nice.
A pretty good feature to have. Yeah, so and then if you want to use this in our rendering tool, we can just click the export button and then choose a template. For instance, choose to export it for RSX Engine, and then choose where to export it and hit export, and it exports all of our textures as flat images, and we can use it and drag it and drop it into Unity, Unreal Engine, RSX Engine, and just use it. All right, yeah. So I don't know, how long have we been doing this, Jeremy?
It's been... Let's see. I think it says about 106 minutes YouTube says we've been streaming for. So
that's pretty long.
Over an hour there.
Yeah, I guess let's just do this one longer, and we'll learn how to, be a bit more efficient when it comes to the time. I don't know how chat feels. Do we even still have viewers, Jeremy?
Oh, absolutely. I think people are captivated here. We've got questions coming in. People are really enjoying the stream so far. They're really appreciating it.
All right, guys, then let's maybe quickly take a look at the atom graph. I think there's a lot of questions around how would you use the atom graph, how would you build something. And that's what I love about Instamat is you don't have to exit this program and now switch to another program if you want to do something node-based. I can just hit Control N, create a new project, and choose an atom graph, and we could start from scratch, but starting with the default project is pretty good because then you're basically already have an output available, and you know what to do here, or you at least have a starting point, and it's not just the entry and return node. And what this does to start this startup project, it basically just creates a blue output. And if I make this red and this 0, you'll see this is the result on our cube. So you can visualize what you do in the atom graph on the cube. But if you want to see it in the image viewer, you can actually do that as well. But it only works on output. So if I right click here and I choose view output in my image viewer, you'll see it down here. And then if I update the color, it updates in real time as well. And something that I think you recommended to show, Jeremy, is to do a small effect that was shown on or asked for on Discord, is how to do a pixelize effect. And I think that's a very nice way of demoing the atom graph. And so basically what we want to do is take an input image. So I'll add an input image here and I'll call that image. And then we want to, whatever that image is, we want to pixelate it. So I'll call my project pixelate and the category is image. And I can double tap here to type a description, pixelates the input image. All right, so we'll just use that. And now we have the input image here, but you can see on our cube it's still black because we're not using it. So to use it, we'll just drag in our image like in the element graph, and here it is. And in order to do something with it. And keep in mind, the atom graph works on a per pixel basis. So every time it's doing something, it's processing a pixel on your input image. So it's 1 pixel in, 1 pixel out. So to read from the image, we can't just read from the whole image like you would do in the element graph. What you would do here is to read from it, you would drag a connection and then type read. So you read 1 pixel, and then here you get your pixel. But unlike in the atom graph, you don't just have the colorful pins, which are the parameters. You also have the white pins at the top, which we're calling the control flow graph, which basically controls how the thing executes. So right now you see it goes from entry to write pixel to set output. And if I would just plug in, if I remove this and I plug in my read pixel output into write pixel, it actually complains. And if we look here, it says that the connections actually, it violates the execution because it's not connected in the execution graph. So it goes from entry to write pixel, and then it uses read pixel, but read pixel is not connected, which means it's never executing. So to fix this, we actually have to drag a line from here to read pixel, and now the execution goes from the entry point to read pixel. It reads the pixel, and then for that pixel or texel, and then writes it to the output image, and it's still black, but that's because we didn't assign an image here. So if we assign an image like the Instamat gradient here, and we do something with it. Let's break that. I'm not sure what I'm doing wrong, but this should actually just... Wait, why did it reset? Did I undo? Did I not commit the image? Who knows?
It's possible.
It's live. we can't rewind. At least we cannot do it. I think the viewers can.
Right.
But once you assign an image, then there's actually something here. Before it was just black. But the thing is, even if there's no image assigned, you could, like in the element graph, you could actually control what the default color is that's being used if you don't have an image assigned. But we use the Instamat gradient image right here, and you can see it supports alpha. So where you can see the checkerboard image is basically where the image is transparent, and if you would assign a grayscale image, it would automatically, okay, that's not a grayscale image. This one is grayscale. It would still work because Instamat would do the heavy lifting for you to make sure that it becomes a color image and can be used as is. Right, so here's our input image, and you can see here we see it actually, but on the cube, because it doesn't render alpha blended, you actually don't see the alpha channel. So let's use the gradient like this. All right, so here's our image, and as I said, it's processing pixel by pixel. Let me save this graph, and maybe I can illustrate this, and I could actually use, maybe I can create a material layering project to illustrate. We can use it as a 2D painting tool, so that's what we're going to do here to illustrate how this works. So nice. in our, let me increase the saturation, maybe add a black fill layer at the bottom. So when the atom graph processes an image, it processes all of these pixels here, pixel by pixel by pixel by pixel by pixel by pixel. And then it basically reads 1 pixel from here. And then if we assume that red is my output image, it reads the pixel, writes the pixel, reads the pixel, writes the pixel. So basically that's what it is that it's doing right now. But what we actually want to do is we want to pixelate. And to pixelate, we want to take a group of pixels. Like, for instance, we want to take all of those pixels right here and then write those pixels to a single output pixel. But basically, we want to not just write. So with the group, there's one part missing actually, is we want to, for all of those pixels in the output group, we would just want to select 1 pixel on when we read from it, right? So for all of the red dots, we just want to take that pixel and then write that pixel to all of those pixels, right? So that's what it is that we actually want to do here in order to pixelate. And if we would repeat that process over and over, it would pixelate our image. So how would we do that? And this is actually not so difficult once you understand it. So when we read from a texel, when we get a texel coordinate that Instamat gives us here that we read from the image, it's a value between 0 and 1. That's the image space basically. And what we want to do is we basically want to say that a specific range between 0 and 0.1 0.01, for instance, all becomes 0. And then from 0.1, it all becomes 0.1 all the way until we're at 0.2. And to do that very easily, we can take the texel coordinate, and this gets a bit more technical, but maybe that's beneficial for some of you guys. I'm going to take the texel coordinate, and then I'm going to multiply it by a value. I'm going to multiply it by 100. So now we have our texels not just between 0 and 1, they go from 0 to 100. But it's not a fixed increment 0, 1, 2. There's all these small pixels between that now have 0, 0.1, 0.2, then 1, 1.1, 1.2, etc. until we're at 100 right now because we multiply. And now we can remove those fractional increments and then say that everything between 1 and 2 becomes 1. And we can do this using what's called a floor operation. So if we type floor here, floor is basically, as the description says right here, it computes the nearest integer less than or equal to a. Right? So if we plug that in, it will take those values between 1 and 2 or 2 and 3 or whatever, and then just remove everything that's behind the decimal comma. And it will all become 2. And then it will all become 3. So then we're basically clipping those numbers like this. But what happens if we plug this in? It's garbage, but that's to be expected, right? Because we're still in that big numerical range between 0 and right now 100, which doesn't make sense because the image space is between 0 and 1. So Jeremy, what do you think? What do we have to do here?
Oh, we have to remap it back to the 0 to 1, right?
So how would you do that?
That's a good question. Maybe we would divide. We would divide it. I don't
That's
know.
perfect. You see, you're an absolute senior here. So what we're going to do is we're searching for divide by float. So it's actually pretty obvious to what we have to do. We multiply 100, and then we clip our numbers, and then we divide again by 100. And then we're back in the image space, and you can see we pixelate already. So that's how easy it is to create an effect like this. But right now it's a bit tedious, right? Because this node is pretty stupid. It can only do pixelation at a 100 pixel increment. But what if the user would want to control how many pixels you have or fake pixels you have in the output image? To do that, we can just drag B, and similar to the atom graph, we can just type pixel count and then expose pixel count as an input variable, and then plug it into this one and also plug it into this guy. And as with the atom graph, the element graph, you can just make your connections a bit neater by dragging those points, double tapping the connection, and then just dragging the dot around. So you can create a very beautiful looking graph. And now we can control our pixel count. So I could even say 16 pixels, and now you see you have an effect that looks like you have 16 pixels in the input image. Pretty nice, and you don't need to blit it into a low res texture and then resample at a high res texture to achieve this effect. So 64 pixels, but I still feel like we could do better, right? This, like, entering a number here is pretty tedious. The user would want to have a slider here. At least I would want to have a slider here, and we can change that very easily. We can just go to the variable editor up here, and then we can control exactly how this parameter is displayed in the UI. So we can change the control to slider here, and then we can say the minimum is maybe 16 pixels, and the maximum is maybe 250 pixels, or let's say 256. And if we go back to our graph, you see magically it becomes a slider, and we can now drag it around and we can perfectly see our pixels coming to life. What do you say, Jeremy?
That's great. I now have to go and create one for myself. So now that we've made this. So by the way, if people are coming into Instamat new and fresh from just from the asset texturing and painting side of things with layers, we also have the node-based and graph-based side of things as well. And the graph that we're looking at here is the atom graph. We have four actually different graph types here in Instamat. The fourth one being the function graph, and I can see in your expression there. And what we normally use is the element graph to be able to combine different things together, like grunges and noises, create materials and meshes and things like that. And the graph that we're currently using in this example is the atom graph. And this is where you can create your own image processing nodes, right? And so
No,
Why
no,
are you
I'm
laughing?
sorry. I was laughing because I made the expression actually not because of what you said, because I was looking at the producer screen and I realized
Oh,
the
okay.
screen is actually looking yellowish. And the reason is that
Oh
it's so
no.
late here in Germany that my computer is enabling this like sundown mode, where it tints the screen more yellow to
Right.
make it a bit nicer on the eyes. And I was like, why is this so yellow? And I realized it's actually doing the tinting of the screen, which is quite funny. So I disabled that actually.
Oh
So the
no, yeah, don't
screen
worry.
chat probably didn't notice because it's like slowly, minute by minute, the screen becomes more yellow. That's hilarious.
That's funny. Well, yeah. So we're burning the midnight oil as we're working, streaming with these long streams, which is great to show this off. But just to finish off my point here, what we're looking at in the Atom Graph is the ability to create these custom shaders, these custom image processing nodes, and these filters that Manfred is making here for this pixelate effect. So I was just going to say, once we have this pixelate effect, what can we do with it once we create this atom?
Yeah, so I created a comment. Comments help to make things more readable. I'm sorry, Jeremy. What did you say?
You're totally fine. No,
I
I
was
was.
so locked into the thing, man. I didn't hear what you were saying.
It's all good. No, I was just saying, now that we've created this atom, we've created this kind of program, as it were, this function. What can we do with it now
Yeah.
that we've built it using the atom graph?
Yeah, I mean, once you build it, you can put it into your user library, and it becomes a node like any node in Instamat. You can use it for your materials. You can bring it into the atom graph, and you see now you have the pixelate node here, and you can do all the amazing things with it. You can bring in a material and pixelate it. For instance, I can bring in this. I love this lava material. This one, and you can connect the base color to your pixelate node, and there you go. You have pixelated your material, and you can actually repeat this, right? I could even do that for my emissive, and I could do that for my normal map, and I can also do it for my roughness map. But you see what happened here actually. A lot of our nodes are grayscale convertible, right? Like the blend node, you can switch between grayscale and color. And that's pretty magical that this works, that your node, whatever you plug in, it just works. For instance, if I bring my blend node and I connect the roughness to it, you see it switches to be a grayscale node automatically. I delete this and I connect my base color, and it's a color node. And that's a pretty awesome feature. And we made this available to our users as well, and it's so incredibly convenient and easy to use. All you have to do is you go to Pixelate, to your custom atom, you go to metadata, and then you can go to grayscale permutable, and you can enable this switch, and then it's going to be like magic. Everything will just work. So going back to the element graph, here's my pixelate node, and if I duplicate it, I can plug in, actually I deleted it normal, so let's bring that back. If I plug in my roughness, you see it switches automatically to grayscale. It works now like one of our stock Instamat library nodes. And it also has a seed, but the seed doesn't make a lot of sense for this node because we don't use any of the randomization features. So I can also disable the seed if I choose expose seed. And now it's a really good citizen. It doesn't have a seed, so the user knows it has no randomization. But you have the pixel count here, and it's grayscale convertible. So let me bring in the metalness as well, and the AO, and also the height. So we have all of those nodes, and then we can actually create a material make node and bring all of those guys back. And you could also now take your node and then basically wrap it in an element graph to create like a material pixelate that does all of that stuff for you automatically.
Exactly. I was just going to bring that up. So we've moved into two different graph types here. One of them, the original one that we were using, was the atom graph. This is now the element graph. And so you can kind of think of it like chemistry, where the element graph, you can combine multiple atoms together to create, more complex effects using this type of compositing and manipulation workflow. That's awesome.
Yeah, and we get a lot of questions from the community. How can we use it for like retro games? How can we make stylized textures? That's why I like this demo here, because you can see how you build a tiny node, and all of the material library is now usable for your retro style boomer shooter, and you can create a really, really compelling looking thing. And again, we can control how many pixels we have here in the image, but 64 and 32, if you target like that Quake 1 level generation, is actually a good match. I think this was around the texture size that these games used.
Nice.
So I think there's more that people want to do with this, right? So what if we want to use that filter now in our layering texture? Say we want to pixelate our crate, can we do that? So if I save this package here, I go to the crate. So I assume I can just now use it as a filter, right? So I go back here. Crate actually looks pretty cool. I didn't see it for a while. So if I go to the filter menu here and I pick from library, I choose my package, but the node isn't here. And the reason is you need to tell Instamat that this node is actually a usable filter, that it works good as a filter. And that's on you to tell us. So if you go back to the pixelate, there's in the metadata section, there's actually a field called layering compatibility. So if you choose this field and you open the drop down, you can see there's filter. So if you use filter and you save, and if everything works out well, I should be able to go to my crate bag and then basically apply that filter here, pick from library, and here it is. You see, that's my system, my Instamat library, and here's my package, and I can just use my filter like this, and you can see I can pixelate my crate like this. But you can see there's something happening, right? And it's similar to the sharpen filter, right? Because what happens here is the UV shells, right? It's now pixelating some stuff from that's outside of the mesh boundaries, the UV shell boundaries, and that's being dragged back into our mesh. So we would want to fix this. So this effect is good for materials, but it's not yet good enough to be used as a filter. So when you do a filter that's convoluting data, and you see if I increase this, let's increase this all the way to 1000, the seam will become less and less visible because it's pulling less and less data in. But what if we want to do like a big pixelization effect on our crate, but not have the issue with the seams? And that's actually very, very easy to do as well. Again, it's like what I said earlier. It seems complex, but we make that stuff very easy for you to do once you know how to do it. But that's why we're doing the stream, so you guys can actually know how to do it. So let's fix that together. And I think that's the last thing that we actually show here in Instamat today. So to fix that, we need a more complex node. The atom graph in and by itself will not be able to do it because it needs geometry information, because it needs to do things outside of the local pixel processing that it's doing. So to fix it, and again, that's only something you can do in Instamat and no other tool. We're going to create another element graph, and we don't use any template for this. And we know we want to pixelate. So we can bring in our pixelate node that we created here. And I know I want to do a pixelate for the layering project. So I call it pixelate mesh, and I'll put it into my mesh image, or maybe mesh filter category. And our starting point is our pixelate node, of course. But what we have to do is we have to give it the extra information of the data outside of the UV shell. So what we're going to do here is I have to think about in what order this goes. So what we need is actually we need the mesh from the layering stack, right? That's something that we know. We need to have a mesh somewhere here in the graph. So I'm going to add an input here, and the input is an element mesh. And I'll change the input parameter name to mesh, and that's really important. So the layering graph is all about semantics and automatically move data along the pipeline using semantics. So one of those semantics would be calling this input parameter of your mesh actually mesh, so the layering stack can understand it. And then we're going to pick a default mesh, and I'm using the unit cube that's non-tiling here, so it's more like a properly UV unwrapped mesh, and then I'll bring it into my graph. And if we look at this, what the difference is, if I plot the UVs here, you can see that we have all the 6 cube face sides UV unwrapped, and we can even render the cube so we can understand what it is that we're dealing with here. So I'll use the mesh render depth, and we can see, okay, that's a cube. That's pretty neat. It's a beautiful way to work, by the way. You can always visualize exactly what you're working with by just bringing in a couple of nodes and in the graph, because Instamat, again, that's something you can't do in other tools. You can work with images and build a material like you can do with the big corp tool called Substance, I think. But you can also work with meshes and do stuff like this and bring the workflow together. So let's go back to our unit cube here. Right, that's our unit cube. And what we want to do here basically is we want to take the UV shells as you guys see it, but expand the information from the UV shells. So when we pixelate, we have enough information available for the pixelate to do a good job. So we know the process, at least most people should know that this process is called dilation or solidification. So we know we want to do a solidification on our data. And we also know, besides the mesh, that we're going to have an input image that our filter is going to process, right? A filter has an input, an image like our pixelate node here, and an output. So let's mimic this. So I'll take the output from my pixelate, drag a line, and just expose it. And here we have our output. And we also need an input. So I can just drag the pixelate input and then choose expose image as graph input. So we have this set up like this, and we know we want to solidify the image. So, and then use the output of the solidify to do the pixelization like this. But like this, the solidify node doesn't really know what it should solidify, right? It needs a mask to know which areas should be solidified, extended, so the pixelize node has enough information to do its job. So to do that, we can actually use the mesh mask node. So the mesh mask basically creates a mask that represents all of our UV shells. And then as the input, we can plug in our input image here, but we choose on the solidify node, use a mask, and then we plug in our mesh mask, and then we can increase the solidification, and you can see how it extends from our UV shells. Actually, if we would just to show you guys how this works, I can just bring in the mesh UV and then plug in my mesh and then plug this in. You'll see exactly what it does. You see it extends the UV boundaries and it grows. So once we run this through our pixelate node, it'll have more information available to do a good job. Right, so again, we plug in our input image and we can actually use a different image so it's a bit more clear. Let's just use this noise gradient here. And there's one more thing you should do in layering. So layering is very complex and it's dealing a lot with different meshes that are being processed, different UDIM tiles. And if you want your mesh to work well or your filter to work well in these scenarios, you should expose a couple of parameters like the mesh render mode and the submesh filter. So right click here and just expose these guys. And you don't have to worry about these too much. Just make sure that you expose them from your mesh mask and then you're good to go. Okay, so we take the mesh, we create the mask, we expose the needed parameters. We do a solidification on our input image that the layering engine is going to give us for free. And then we run it through our pixelate, and finally we have our output. And what we should do as well is allow the user, when it's in layering, to modify the amount of pixelization that we're doing here, right? So that is so awesome that how fast Instamat is, right? When it comes to processing, like I drag the slider, everything is absolutely instant. So right click here on the parameter, exposes input. And the beauty is now I don't have to set this up as a slider again. It knows it was a slider, so you'll be exposed as a slider. And we can also drag this a bit up so it's more convenient in the layer stack. And again, if I save this here and I go back to my layering stack, I hope you guys remember that this is not going to work, right? So let's remove this guy or let's just hide this guy right here, and we pick another filter. This is not going to work, right? Jeremy, why is this not going to work?
That's because we didn't tell Instamat that this is going to be used as a filter or as an effect. Remember, we rely on you to be able to tell Instamat what's available, so you don't just see a whole bunch of things that you can't use in the layer stack.
Exactly. Similar to the atom graph, and again, I love Instamat for its consistency. It works the same. You can go to layering compatibility in your metadata. So if you select something here in the graph, you see it's not available. But if you just click on the graph, you modify the properties, the attributes of your element graph itself, and then we can choose the layering compatibility here, and then also set that to filter. And we also don't want to expose the seed. And if we move that to the left and save it, and we can go back to our layering project. And again, if everything works, we can now pick from the library, and there's our beautiful pixelate mesh. And you see it understood it's for the mesh, it understood it's for layering, so the preview looks very different. Let's double tap it here. And lo and behold, it works. We don't break up our seams. It looks absolutely cool. It pixelates beautifully, and we can roll with this. It looks wonderful.
So that's great. So yeah. I was going to quickly, if you want to do like a quick rundown of everything that we just did, I was just going to kind of overview everything that we just did here to create the filter. So yeah, so we basically started with an atom, right? And we started by creating the process itself by manipulating the pixels using the atom graph, right? And then what we did was we were able to use that atom directly within the layer stack, and we wanted to use that effect as is. But in this case, what we're doing is we're expanding upon that atom graph by bringing it into an element graph and wrapping it within these additional features that you get, such as being able to utilize the filter in Udemy-based projects, multiple material sections, and things like that by exposing the proper parameters, but also adding additional functionality like the solidifying node to be able to remove those seams from the UVs that we're getting.
Exactly. And as you see, it works on the base color. We might want to do the same on our normal map, for instance, and other channels. And here's where it gets interesting, right? This is a color node, and if I apply this now to roughness, it's not going to work. It's going to tell us that this is not compatible. So no matter what I do, it's not going to work. If I want to pixelate my height map, it's not going to do anything. And you see that in your layering stack, it's red. It's like, I don't want to do this because I'm going to break your data, and I'm not going to do that by itself. So what we would have to do here is to go to our pixelate mesh node and make that grayscale compatible. But this is not going to work as automatic as it does with all of the magic and the heavy lifting that the atom graph does for us. So what we have to do instead is we have to save this project as a copy here. So I can just clone my project and then save it as a copy. And you see it's going to create the pixel mesh duplicate, and I'm just going to call that grayscale. And there's also a way to make that graph flippable, but I'm not going to show this in this live stream today. It's more advanced, but you can have an element graph behave like an atom graph that has a switch, and it can go from color to grayscale. But right now, let's just turn it into a grayscale node by going to our output and its color, right? So we right click here, change variable type to gray, and it's now gray, perfect, but the connection is red. It doesn't like it. I find that to be pretty offensive, but it's okay for now. Let's flip our input image as well. We changed the variable type to gray. Now it doesn't like this here, but luckily those are flippable. So I can just go in here, and everybody's at peace. The connections are not fighting anymore, and we can save that as our grayscale version of our filter. I can go back to my Instamat crate, and now I can swap my pixelate mesh to pixelate mesh grayscale, and you can see we can now pixelate our scratches, which looks really funny, those pixelated scratches actually. Actually, it's the height information, it's the dents that are now pixelated, and you can see how that looks. That's actually funny. Maybe not so smart to pixelate the height map, but let's pixelate the roughness map, and let's pixelate the metalness map, and maybe pixelate the ambient occlusion map. That looks interesting. Pixelate ambient occlusion. And you see this is a pass-through, right? So it's automatically modifying everything that's below it, and it's just working super well. So cool at what we can do with Instamat, guys. I absolutely love this. I hope you guys love this too. This is insane. I told you it's going to be a great show. I think we fulfilled our promise here. This is insane that we can do this so easily within Instamat. So what didn't we do here? I think did we do the normal channel here? Yeah, we did the normal and the base color, roughness, metalness. Yeah, I mean, the height channel doesn't work that well. Or maybe if we go really high with the pixelization, let's see what happens if we pixelate here at 512. Yeah, actually now you get the bumps, and that looks interesting. I mean, that's a completely new aesthetic. I've never seen it in a game where you get like the height gradient is pixelated. That's so interesting. What an effect.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah, pretty awesome how we can completely change the art direction of our crate, right? From like photorealistic, super cool to pixelated and retro. That's so awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
All right, guys, do you have any questions for this? Otherwise, I would wrap up this demo today. Should we make these files available to you? Is there value in us putting those files together and distributing them to you guys? There's probably some delay here, but I'll just. I was
going to say, meanwhile, there's a note to our producer behind the scenes. It looks like whenever I'm appearing on screen in that overlay that I'm getting two of me and an output. So we might have an extra audio output in there that might have been toggled in that one overlay, just so you're aware. Maybe something to look at while we transition through the scenes. But also, by the way, if you guys are hearing an echo or anything, just feel free to let us know in the chat, for side by side. We can fix that up as we go. But yeah, any questions, guys? Do you guys want to have these files available so that you can, check them out and figure out how they work? Definitely let us know either in the comments of this video or in the live chat if you're lucky here to be alive.
I'm so lucky.
I feel very lucky.
2025. Yeah, but also crazy, right? That I could use this producer. Could you switch to my desktop again? Also pretty awesome, like that I used Instamat as a 2D painting program. I wonder if we should actually allow people to use all of that powerful procedural stuff for 2D image painting. Let us know if that's something you guys want to see. But I mean, I didn't have a tool, so I just used this, and it actually worked really well. And I just realized we could even use our filter on the brush layer, right? We could pixelate my drawing here, and it's procedural. So this is insane. You can't do that stuff in any other painting tool, to my knowledge. It's so 2D painting with all of the dynamics and brush dynamics and everything is modifiable and configurable. I think that's pretty awesome, and it's something entirely new. I have never seen that.
Yeah, you very easily do spray painting and pixel painting right here in the material layering.
Absolutely abusing material layering, but it's giving us a plane, and I have a brush, so I'm happy.
That's great. Well, the comments coming in, everyone's saying awesome stream. They would love to have the project files made available. That would be great. They're saying that they're doing an awesome job in giving some fantastic information and teaching. So awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, we're gonna put it up on. I would say we uploaded the whole thing to Polyverse, the whole package, right? And people can download it from Polyverse. Guys, if you don't use Polyverse, you're missing out. It's really awesome. Sign up for it. Store your files there. Find some cool stuff. There's so much awesome things on Polyverse that you'll get for free from us. Let me just go here to Polyverse. From assets you can use for your games to materials you can find, and it's just really phenomenal. All your Instamat packages you can store and directly use on Polyverse. It's really phenomenal. You can use it for free and upload as much as you want into public libraries. You only ever have to pay if you want to use private libraries, but even the free subscription, like Instamat, allows you to create private content, private libraries. I really recommend you guys to try it and use it. It's really phenomenal what you can do with Polyverse. Fantastic tool. I also love the AR features. Uploading a mesh, uploading a material, and seeing it in AR is a pretty incredible thing.
Yeah, and the fact that it computes the light automatically for you, so you see the material in a realistic environment where the reflections of the light are accurate. It's pretty cool. They can do that really quickly just by using a phone.
Couldn't agree more.
Okay, yeah, I think, producer, that it's that one particular scene where I'm in the corner there with the screen capture. I think there's some audio routing twice in there. It's probably something for us to look at later on. But I think this particular scene looks good. See, I don't have the special glasses like you, man. Those are great.
Yeah. So I needed to wear those to finish this part of the live stream, guys. So I'll be saving my package here. I'll make sure that Jeremy and the team is going to make these files available to you, and keep the comments coming. Tell us what you guys need, what you want to hear more of this live stream. I hope the future ones are not going to be so long, because this is a lot of time in my schedule that's really difficult to carve out. But I hope you guys like the energy to hang out with us, to discuss these things, to look at the workflow, some more sophisticated stuff that you normally don't find other CEOs doing with you guys. So I'm really happy to do this with you. But there's actually some more things we want to show. Let me quit and save here. And that is going through some of the comments that you guys made and some of the things we found. Maybe you can do a screen share again, Mr. Producer. Yeah, one of the things, I don't know if you guys will hear my desktop audio, but maybe you can confirm this. And I want to give a shout out to the team from Game From Scratch. It's an awesome channel. I used to look at a lot of those videos these guys produce. Always very interesting to stay up to date. I recommend you guys to subscribe to these folks. They always push new content. They always surface some of the new stuff, so you don't have to look around. And they also did that for Instamat. I didn't know about this. This was floated by me before the live stream, and I absolutely love it. The guys mentioned Instamat as one of the most exciting tools here. Absolutely lovable. I love you guys. So let's hit play. I don't know if you guys can hear the audio. Maybe somebody...
We have Instamat. Now, Instamat is kind of the...
Do you hear the audio, Jeremy?
It's just on steroids. This
is checking the live stream now.
Tool. And again, if you need to create textures, it is kind of amazing what Instamat is actually capable
I think it's working. I think we're hearing through the
before,
microphone though.
I highly recommend you do
either
so
way.
now. Especially
thanks
with,
guys very much for the shout
Mixer.
out.
part of the whole Quixel mixer thing seems to be kind of dying or being integrated into Unreal Engine directly. So there's not that many alternatives out there to Substance. But I think if you check this guy out, you'll be pretty amazed at what Instamat can already do, and it keeps expanding at a pretty staggering rate. So Instamat is
keep it coming. Just keep it coming. I hope the segment goes 10 minutes.
That's great.
Let's stop here. We don't need to continue here. So that's great. Thank you so much, Game from Scratch. This is phenomenal. We love you guys. Yeah, and there's actually somebody who's just cranking out Instamat content. So also a shout out to Aozen Studios. I don't know how to pronounce this. Aozen. Aozen.
That would be my best
Maybe
guess.
it's Aozen.
Oh, I like that.
Ambient occlusion Zen. Let us know how to pronounce this. But he's doing the Lord's work. He's cranking out a lot of great tutorials for you guys, really high quality, going in depth and being consistent and frequent about it. So we wanted to push this for you. And if you keep doing more great tutorials, we'll keep promoting you. So keep doing this. Also, guys, if you want to create content, we will promote you. We will put you on blast and on rotate and then make sure your content is amplified through all of our subscribers where we can. So as we grow, you will grow as well. Yeah. So the next thing is...
those videos are great.
Yeah, fantastic, right? I mean, it's high quality production. I also love the way that he presents. It's a very concise, to the point style. No time is being wasted. Zip, zap. That's it, done. Next video, next material. I love this. I love this. Yeah. There was also one comment here from you guys on our last video that I have to take off the glass. I actually, guys, I don't see a lot, by the way. I'm blind. I'm legally blind when I'm wearing these glasses. Yeah, somebody was, being critical about us being on X, and the team found this. Obviously, it's a valuable opinion, but it's also exactly what I was talking about in my last stream, that you have to relax, man. You have to have some love for everybody. Even if the opinion is different, it doesn't matter. We're both humans, and it's not so bad. We can still be friends, even if you vote for somebody else. If you're on Blue Sky, I can still be your friend because I'm on X. It doesn't matter to me, and I feel like that's the spirit that we have to put out more into the world. I remember, in the 2000s and 2010s, it was more about world peace. I haven't heard about world peace as a concept for so long. And I feel it's so sad if we think about back to the 90s and 2000s, it's like everybody was hopeful and was going for world peace. And we should have way more about this. So in any case, so let's go over this content. So X is owned by someone who made a Hitler salute in front of the world. I understand the thing that he was doing, but to the same degree, if I would touch my heart and reach out to the world, you could say I'm doing a Hitler salute. And I think you can see what you want to see in those things, and you don't always have to see the worst in people. You'll have a much better life if you always see the best in people. You won't feel like everybody's betraying you or everybody's mean to you or everybody's an enemy. And I don't think Elon Musk, if just take a photo of any of his staff member team, and you'll see he's hiring a lot of Asians, a lot of Africans, a lot of Eastern Europeans. I don't think that Elon Musk is a Nazi, but I just can't. The facts don't say that. I mean, if there would be an actual Nazi running a company, the person would certainly only hire blue-eyed, blonde people. I just don't see that in Elon Musk. And you most certainly wouldn't be able to build a company like X or SpaceX or Tesla or any of these companies. If you don't go by merit, you're not going to be able to build. And I think he's building. He's cooking. And I don't think a Nazi cannot do that. You have a very limited talent pool if you filter by those traits, by some superficial, you're going to be our CTO because you have blonde hair and blue eyes. I just don't see that. Was it smart? Obviously not. But do you expect from somebody who's as talented as Elon Musk, as when it comes to specific topics like building a company against all odds? Like when Elon Musk was building Tesla, everybody said it's impossible to build an automotive company. Just stop it. It's not possible. You needed to do this 100 years ago. It's impossible now. Like if you still do that against all odds and you believe in yourself and you still pull it off, don't expect that guy to be, humble or expect him to be the most, reasonable person, right? I mean, people want Elon Musk with a character like some kind of a bureaucrat or somebody who's, a philosopher, but that's not him. He doesn't think too much. He's getting shit done, and sometimes you mess up. Like I mess up all the time. I probably messed up this live stream already by even talking about these things. But I do think don't put too many labels on people. In any case, let's continue. Not once, but twice. Yeah, but I don't see. I mean, I don't think that it's necessarily a Nazi salute. I mean, the optics are not great. The optics aren't great. I can't deny it. Like, I agree, but I mean, how often is Elon Musk on some kind of political stage and everybody's cheering on him, and if he feels the moment and wants to show it, there's not too many gestures you can make besides throwing your hearts at people. And then if your hand is this way, that way, your arm has that angle, and you apply those metrics, I feel it's funny. I don't think that's right. Is actively pushing Nazi propaganda on the platform. I don't know if he's doing that. I haven't seen it. I don't think I'm not sure if I'm following him, but I haven't seen him pushing Nazi propaganda. You can say he's pushing right-wing propaganda, and if you put a label of everybody who's right-wing is a Nazi, then I understand the take, but I don't think he's really pushing Nazi propaganda. I haven't seen that. And thus actively helping hate and dehumanizing to spread, whether you want to see it or not. I mean, he has his opinions and he has his takes, but I haven't seen him really spread hate. But again, hate is a difficult, especially on like social networks, hate is a very difficult label to put on things because there's no clear measurement of when something is hate. That's why I don't really like the concept of hate speech, because oftentimes hate speech is the speech that people don't like, the things you shouldn't say, and I think that's the danger here, and it's easy to be more tolerant. Acting as if being on X was no big deal, as if it's all just about different opinion, feels strange in today's climate and decline of social structure and humanistic values. Yeah, but I think, we can counter this better if we're being more tolerant and we are helping actively to lower the temperature by not putting labels on people. Look, if you put a label on somebody, you'll only see the label you put on. And once you mentally apply a label to somebody, it's difficult to remove that label from the person. Think about it. Once you consider somebody stupid or unfriendly, unkind, it's very difficult for you to ever perceive the person as something else. It's why children go through the world full of amazement, because they walk down the street and they see so many things, and they don't look at a tree and say, oh, this is just a tree, it doesn't matter. No, they're like, wow, this is so big, this is so phenomenal. And once you start putting labels on, this is a tree, this is a dog, this is that, you don't really look at each individual thing anymore, because you start putting those labels on categories of people, categories of things, and the world just, your perception of the world is at a loss here. And then especially for a company from Germany, I would have hoped for a clearer stance, at least admitting that you're primarily on there out of necessity, which I think everybody would understand, not because you're indifferent to it. I'm not indifferent to it. Again, I'm being very specific about it, that I don't believe it makes sense to always go from one camp to the other camp, put labels on people and cause more separation, cause more, distance between people. I feel like we should be more united. We should be more peaceful. We should have more time to listen to. And when we listen to people, it makes sense. When you're in an argument, before you respond, try to repeat to the person what the person said. That again lowers the temperature, lowers the velocity, instead of just engaging from the emotional level or just responding fast and based on the usual takes. But it's also weird, if you say that, hey, because you're a German company, you do have to do that. I'm from Germany, yeah. Of course I am, but why would I be guilty or have any responsibility for what other people did? My family most likely also suffered from the war, the German part of my family. And why should we always carry that guilt forward? We don't have to. There's a clean slate. Germany rebuilt. We're doing better. We're a very tolerant society. And I don't think there's a specific stance that a German company should take. We're all on level playing field. And at some point, something that has been 100 years in the past, it doesn't need to be kicked forward and forward again, only to force people to act a specific way. I think I'm trying to run a good company here, and we're hiring and we're doing the right things. We're not getting too, we're not political at all, and we're trying to do the right thing is all I can say. But like I said a few minutes earlier, I'm messing up, and you'll see me, stumble and fail. And probably at some point, if we get big enough, you'll have people put labels on me and call me this and that. Maybe even because of this stream that we're doing today. Maybe in a few years, they'll come back and say, hey, look what you said here. Look the joke you made, or whatever's not what you can't say anymore. But I do appreciate the the comment. I do like to engage with you guys. Anyways, I hope Manfred is doing well. He looks a little bit sad, tired and sad. That's I'm not. Guys. If I do a live stream like guys, if I do a live stream like this, guys, come on, look at me. Do I really look sad and tired? No, I'm not. I'm full of energy. I have so much energy. You would be like, please, when is that? When is that guy ever gonna get tired? How is that possible? Yeah, but I do appreciate the comment. Harry, you're a great part of our community. That's really fantastic. Thank you so much. I hope I could clear it up in a way that, you don't feel like I'm putting you on the spot. That was not my opinion. That was not my intention. I feel like maybe that helps you to change your perspective a little bit. But what's next? Yeah, I mean, we published this, I think it was yesterday or so, where we show a pretty cool feature that we have in RSX, and I think that's something that other engines don't have, where it's so easy to build complex vehicles and complex, cars, motorbikes, or even tanks. You can do a lot of really amazing things here, and what you see here is a specific, a window where you can easily build a vehicle, and you can also just hit the play button in that window and drive your car around and see how it behaves, modify the friction curves, add a few more wheels, change the wheel size, change the horsepower of the car, and just drive it around. I think that's phenomenal, and it just once again shows that we're approaching things differently than other engines, and I'm sure you guys are gonna love RSX engine. Like, Instamat is phenomenal, and imagine a game engine or a 3D engine built with the same drive to do something new, to do something different and change the game. It's really phenomenal. You see here you have these curves, the friction curve, and you can click on it, and then you have a curve editor and you can modify the curve, and it's so easy to understand. And normally dealing with vehicles is such a tiresome, complex approach. Do we have some comments on my rant?
Yeah, no, everyone is definitely really appreciating what you were saying. They're definitely supportive of the things that you're saying as well. They say,
love you guys.
They're saying this is the personal growth part of the stream, which I agree. We went from everywhere from talking about labels and different opinions to the art of conversation and being able to respond to people by de-escalating intense discussions and things like that too. I think it's a great thing to be able to bring that kind of stuff up too. And as we said, the stream is kind of unscripted all over the place, but I think it's really great to be able to talk about these kinds of things as well. And not downplaying what we just saw.
If we spend so much time on a stream, right, we might as well just, do it long and be a bit more personal and, not just on, okay, we do Instamat, it's business, and let's move on. Good night, guys. No, we can hang out. I mean, that's really the intention to build a stream that's not just, interesting to watch from the technical side, but maybe even fun because, we're being stupid and goofy. Maybe you find that interesting to spend some time with us, on the human level and see how that. I don't know. No, I don't think any CEO ever did this to this level. But let's just see how it goes. I'm a risk taker. I don't think you can win if you don't risk anything. So let's see how it goes.
100%. I completely agree. And not to downplay what you just showed with RSX with the vehicle system. It looks absolutely awesome. I can't wait for that. I can't wait to start building my first racing game using RSX engine. And the fact that we can easily just start building something like that is really powerful.
Absolutely. Guys, if you haven't already signed up for the early access, you can do so for free, and then you can use RSX during early access for free. It's phenomenal. Imagine just building a world together, building a game together in the same environment, and you see the other person, you see the other camera, you can chat, and you can do all of these fun things that make working so much more interesting. It's powerful. It's really, really big and beautiful, insanely ambitious, super competent, well put together, great team. The whole team loves it. Everybody's passionate. I love it as well. It's really a fantastic project, guys. Check it out. Make sure to go to our website, sign up for RSX on the waiting list, get early. Absolute game changer. There's also some notes here about games that are being released. Let's see what we have. Can I go to YouTube? I haven't seen it actually. Ghost of Yotai. What do you think about that? What is that? Why is that so lewd here? It's just a clean, no account, incognito tab. What are they doing with the youth? I don't think that's right. I mean, that shouldn't be like this, right? It should be a bit more clean. Ghost of Yotai. Let's take a look at the trailer.
This looks absolutely fantastic and beautiful. Did you get a chance to play the first one?
I didn't. Or maybe. Was it also called Ghost of Yotai?
It was the Ghost of Tsushima.
No, I didn't actually.
Tsushima?
Yeah, I didn't. Let's take a look.
It's absolutely stunning. Yeah.
At least we have no ads. I'm surprised we don't have any ads. Wait, is this gonna kill our stream? It's not gonna be copyrighted, right?
You know, I would maybe not with the audio. I would probably, you know, I know it's not necessarily the best thing to do, but in this case, we might get a strike due to the audio from it.
Yeah,
so.
let's keep the audio off then. I'm a risk taker, but but we don't want to get channel strikes already. Yeah. So it's like a slasher game, I guess. Looks beautiful.
It's a samurai combat system. I think it's pretty unique in the sense that it's kind of gauged towards, you know, that kind of quick reaction kind of movements and very, you know, specific kind of movements that you do with swordplay. Again, I didn't play the original either, but from the reviews and things I've seen, it's really unique. And there's one of the things I really like about it actually is that you can go into this special game mode where you can convert it into kind of like the old samurai movies that you used to see, you know, in black and white and stuff like that. And it does more than just changing the color, but it adds, you know, more wind and more,
to make it more dramatic,
dust in the air and stuff like that. You know, just to kind of mirror that feel that you got from. So you really feel like you're in a samurai movie like that.
I actually love this shot here. These snow effects, they always look so impressive. There's one of these effects that are not so difficult to do, but they just look really phenomenal. It's basically some displacement that you do on the data, but it just looks phenomenal. I feel like this is the kind of thing that's missing in games, is more of, you know, the environment being super dynamic. You walk through the mud and it's like displacing everything. You walk through the snow and it's like you get more dirty as you walk through the snow. It's a little bit, it's there in some games, but like GTA is doing that well, but I think that's something that should be more prominent in most games. It just makes it look so, or like the leaves flying around as you swing your sword, right? Stuff like this. That makes the world feel much more alive than just, okay, that's a texture. No, it should be more.
Right. Yeah, it's this level of immersion that's just been really unparalleled, especially in these types of games.
I mean, the Sony studios are banging. They're always doing a fantastic job on the art direction, the presentation, like where just random, you know, camera views look cinematic or they look like they're painted and it's fantastic. I love that. Yeah, that looks great. Yeah, I think Battlefield 6 also releases soon, man. I love Battlefield. I'm absolute.
Wow, yeah, I've seen
I used to be a hardcore Battlefield player. For 3 and 4, actually Bad Company is when I really got into it and we put hours into it, and 3 was just incredible. Do they have like a launch? What's the latest launch live action? No, we don't want to see live action. Is it released or is it gonna be released?
I feel like I just saw the trailer for it. I don't think it's out yet.
Sign in. Oh, we can't do that. Reveal.
I think it was a reveal. I just don't know the exact release date.
Oh, that. So we're going to have some ads.
Thank you, producer.
Yeah, so we'll see. We just talk over the ads while they're running in the background. Yeah, I used to love Battlefield 3, Bad Company for the graphics. And I feel like the first team that really pulled off super dynamic animation systems in combat was Battlefield. Like I remember seeing this before the launch, they put out this tech demo trailer, and I feel like more game studios should do that. Get people hyped up on like the engineering part and the love you put into these small details. Nowadays, they just put out the most mainstream normie kind of thing possible, some launch trailer, live action trailer, but I feel like just show more of, you know, old school, you know, marketing content, tech demos, devlogs and all of that stuff is really missing. But we can go back to the trailer, Mr. Producer. We are already. There we go. I mean, it looks phenomenal. But I feel like the last Battlefield also looked phenomenal. I got it, and I was a bit disappointed in the gameplay. It just didn't feel like Battlefield in the old days, and I really hope that they're bringing this back. But it does look like they're going more for like that Battlefield 3 and 4 energy. I think even the sound, you know, those dun dun dun, those hardcore synthes. I feel like they're trying to, you know, summon up the old ghosts and bring back this energy. Even the post-processing, that blue and heavy post-processing, lens flares, it really looks like Battlefield 3 again.
It's very
Metro,
cinematic.
what a great map. It's phenomenal.
A lot of like dynamic objects in the scene, right? Like,
yeah. I mean, they always did destruction well, right? I mean, that's something that Battlefield did. I think especially, I think it was Bad Company that really made everything destructible. When you played a game like 1 hour on a map, and at the end of the 1 hour, the whole map is like basically flattened. Everybody used tanks to drive through it, or, you know, rockets. It was really phenomenal.
Yeah.
I mean, it does look great. I remember what impressed me a lot in Battlefield 3 was this scene on the jet mission. Yeah, exactly. You type Battlefield 3 and that's what you see. There's this scene where you basically start on like what are those big ships called? Cruisers?
Oh, the aircraft carrier?
Aircraft carrier, yeah, exactly. And when I played this, you know, and imagine they pulled this off in the Xbox 360 generation. These things had like 30 megabytes of VRAM or something like this. Like they're really, really short and thin legs to stand on, but they pulled off this incredible visual quality. But you played this and, you know, you sit at home, the room is dark and you have your sound system, big screen. And, you know, we didn't have flat screens and big screens before the 360 generation. You have to keep that in mind, right? That's the first time you got really immersed as a console gamer. I used to be a PC gamer, but nowadays I just love to kick back on the sofa and take it a bit. I guess I'm older now. I want to have a bit more of a, you know, more comfy position to play. But you're on this on this aircraft carrier and you don't know what the mission is about, and you walk out and all of a sudden you see those waves rolling by the ship and it's raining heavily, and you basically enter the airplane. And then, you know, let me fast forward this, otherwise way too long. So beautiful, look at this, beautiful art direction. And it's not so it's not like they have millions of teraflops and gigaflops to render this stuff. They just pulled it off with really clever use of billboard sprites and skyboxes and effects, and it looks phenomenal. And then you basically enter the airplane, you do some checks to get off the ground, and then you basically fly. And this back then was so radically ambitious, and they pulled it off, and it just looks really fantastic. Like, look at this, the whole art direction, the post-processing, everything is on point here. It looks so phenomenal.
Yeah, that's a fantastic presentation. You know, if you're going to be playing and you're going to be fighting in a scene, you know, something that can really ground you into the scenario, I think that's a nice way to do it. Start somewhere, you have no idea where you are, you think you do, and then all of a sudden the landscape completely changes, and you feel like you're this pilot that's in this kind of like exact scenario where you don't know what's going to happen. You didn't even know where you were, you know, 2 minutes ago, and now you have to go and do this.
Yeah,
it's a way to immerse the player in a way.
And it's really not just a visual presentation. Like, the sound kicks in, the music kicks in, you really feel amazing. Right. You felt amazing playing this. You've never seen something like this. It's like seeing, you know, Terminator 2 in the movie the first time, or imagine going to Star Wars. I'm too young for this, but I imagine people going to the cinema to watch Star Wars, and they go out and they're just completely mind blown by what they've seen. And I feel like we have too little of this these days, right? Where you play something, you watch, and you're like, what the hell did I just experience? Because a lot of what we have is like repeated slop and the same concepts, and it's done in like meeting rooms and boardrooms, and that's the game you're gonna do. And, you know, it's not so much driven by sheer ambition and wanting to do a completely new and better experience than before. And I feel like they nailed this with Battlefield 3. It was fantastic. Yeah. And then you fly with the jet, and like this, the scene is so dark, right? If you look at it, but then a few seconds later, as you fly through the clouds, and then what happens is then all of a sudden you're flying in like blue skies, and it's clearing up, and it's just beautiful. It's really, really incredible how they pulled this off. Amazing job, guys. Like, this is one of the GOATs for me. This is a technical achievement on hardware that's like a fraction of what your phone can do these days.
Right.
Yeah.
Great.
It's 8 o'clock here in Germany, guys. This was a 3-hour live stream. I'm not sure if we can clip anything here, but this was really, really long. I hope you guys had a good time. Jeremy, I think we have to wrap this one up.
Yeah, no, it's been a fantastic pleasure being back here again with another live stream. I mean, we've covered, honestly, so much in here, and I'm pretty sure there's a lot of stuff we can also definitely clip and put in our YouTube channel to make people understand how to use things like the atom graph and being able to texture and baking. It's been a really fantastic evening, I guess now we are for you. So yeah, thanks very much, Manfred, for all the time today, and for everyone watching today. Thank you so much for being here. You know, it's been really great.
All right, thank you, Jeremy. All right, guys, that's it for the stream today. As I mentioned in the beginning, you can expect us to do these more regularly, maybe not at this length. Maybe, I guess the first few that we're going to do might be too long because we have to, build a muscle around, understanding how much time something takes. But we'll try to do these more frequently as my schedule allows. I hope you had a nice time with us, guys. I hope you have a nice evening. I hope you had a fun time with us. So I'll see you around. Take care.
Take care, everyone.
Bye, Jeremy.